Welcome back to Hugin and Munin Stories. In this special third compilation, we've gathered the next 10 episodes of our enthralling Norse mythology and Scandinavian folklore bedtime stories. Prepare to be swept away by legendary sagas, ancient mysteries, and epic tales of gods, heroes, and mythical creatures. Whether you've been with us from the beginning or are just joining the journey, we're thrilled to have you here. Sit back, relax, and let the timeless magic of the North guide you into peaceful slumber. After the stories conclude, the video will gently fade to black, allowing you to drift off to sleep without disturbance. Enjoy the adventure and the calm that follows. Enjoy. In the cold, quiet nights of 13th century Iceland, where the land was as ancient as the sagas whispered through generations, an old man sat alone by the hearth. His name was Snorri Sturluson, a poet and historian who had immortalized the gods and heroes of Norse mythology. But tonight, as the fire's glow flickered across his worn face, Snorri felt the weight of unfinished work. One final story that needed to be told. A stranger appeared at his door, cloaked in mystery and shadow. He spoke of a journey Snorri must take, one that would lead him to the hidden truths of the gods and his own fate. In the darkness of the Icelandic wilderness, where the boundaries between myth and reality blurred, Snorri would discover that his greatest saga was yet to be written. Welcome to Hugin and Munin Stories. This is the last saga of Snorri Sturluson. In the twilight of a cold Icelandic evening, when the sun had dipped low beneath the horizon and the sky was painted in hues of deep indigo, Snorri Sturluson sat alone in his study. The room was filled with the scent of old parchment and ink, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken words. The hearth before him crackled softly, its flames dancing shadows across the walls, like specters of the past. Snorri's eyes, sharp despite his age, traced the lines of a nearly finished manuscript. It was his life's work, a tapestry of tales that wove together the history of gods and men, of heroes and kings. But tonight, a heavy weariness settled over him, not merely the fatigue of age, but the burden of knowledge, the knowledge of things that others could only glimpse in dreams. He had chronicled the sagas of gods and heroes, yet there was one story left unwritten, a tale that existed not in the ancient past but in the living, breathing present. The story of Snorri Sturluson himself. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows like the wail of a lost spirit. Snorri's thoughts wandered back to his early years, to a time when he was just a boy, wide-eyed and eager, absorbing the tales told by the elders. He had been born into a world rich with the lore of the Norse gods, a world where Odin's wisdom was sought, Thor's hammer was feared, and Loki's cunning was distrusted. It was these tales, passed down through generations, that had shaped his understanding of the world, tales that he would later immortalize in his prose Edda. As a young man, Snorri had been driven by an insatiable thirst for knowledge. He traveled across Iceland, speaking with wise men, listening to the songs of skalds, and learning the ancient art of poetry. He became a master of words, a weaver of stories who could capture the essence of a saga in a single verse. But it was not just his love for the old tales that drove him, it was the desire to preserve them. For in those days, the old ways were fading, and the Christian faith was spreading across the land, threatening to erase the memory of the gods. Snorri's mind drifted to the great hall of Reykholt, where he had once entertained the most powerful chieftains of Iceland. It was there in that hall that he had written the prose Edda, a work that would ensure the survival of the ancient myths. The prose Edda was more than just a collection of stories, it was a guide, a handbook for poets, teaching them how to craft verses in the style of the old skalds. It was a testament to the beauty and complexity of Norse mythology, a world where gods and giants clashed, where the fate of men was tied to the whims of the Norns, the weavers of destiny. But Snorri's achievements were not limited to the realm of myth. He had also written the Heimskringla, a history of the Norwegian kings, chronicling their deeds and their lineage. This work was no less important, for it preserved the history of a people who had once ruled vast territories, from the fjords of Norway to the coasts of England and beyond. The Heimskringla was a bridge between the mythic past and the historical present, a record of a time when the line between gods and men was thin, and the world was a place of wonder and danger. Yet, despite all his accomplishments, Snorri could not escape the political turmoil of his time. Iceland was a land of chieftains, each vying for power, and Snorri had not been immune to the machinations of his peers. He had been a politician, a lawmaker, a man who had played the game of power with skill and cunning. But in the end, it was this game that would lead to his downfall. For in the shadows of the political arena, enemies lurked, waiting for the moment to strike. The wind outside grew fiercer, as if the elements themselves were conspiring to remind Snorri of the dangers that awaited him. But Snorri was not afraid. He had faced danger before, had looked into the eyes of death and had not flinched. What troubled him now was not the thought of his own mortality, but the question of his legacy. Would his works endure? Would the stories of the gods continue to be told, or would they fade into obscurity like so many other forgotten tales? As these thoughts weighed on his mind, the fire in the hearth began to dim, and the room grew colder. It was then that Snorri noticed a figure standing in the doorway, a figure cloaked in shadows. The stranger's presence was both unsettling and familiar, as if he had stepped out of the pages of one of Snorri's own sagas. "Snorri Sturluson," the stranger spoke, his voice deep and resonant, like the echo of a distant storm. "The time has come for you to pen your final saga, but this one is not of gods or kings, it is of you." Snorri stared at the figure, his heart pounding in his chest. "Who are you?" he asked, though in his soul he sensed the answer. The stranger stepped into the light, revealing a face that was at once ancient and eternal, a visage that bore the marks of both wisdom and sorrow. "I am the last descendant of the Aesir, the keeper of the old ways," he said, his eyes glowing with a strange light. "The gods have sent me to guide you on your final journey, to show you the truths that lie beyond the myths." Snorri's breath caught in his throat. Could it be true? Could the gods he had written about, the gods he had brought to life in his stories, truly exist? Or was this some trick, a final test of his faith and his resolve? The stranger held out his hand, beckoning Snorri to follow. Without a word, Snorri rose from his chair, his body trembling with both fear and anticipation. The stranger led him out of the study, out into the cold, dark night where the stars shone like distant beacons in the sky. Together, they walked through the frozen landscape of Iceland, a land that had been forged in fire and ice, a land where the old magic still lingered in the stones and the soil. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and the distant roar of waterfalls. The ground beneath their feet was hard and unyielding, a reminder of the harsh realities of life in this unforgiving land. As they walked, the stranger began to speak, his voice carrying the weight of ages. He told Snorri of the creation of the world, of how Ymir, the first giant, had been slain by Odin and his brothers, and from his body the earth was formed. He spoke of the great tree Yggdrasil, whose roots stretched into the underworld and whose branches touched the heavens. He spoke of the gods and their eternal struggle against the forces of chaos, of the battles fought in the realms of Asgard, Midgard, and Jotunheim. These were stories Snorri knew well, stories he had written down for future generations. But now, hearing them from the lips of this mysterious stranger, they took on a new meaning. They were no longer just tales to entertain and educate, they were truths, hidden in the folds of myth, waiting to be uncovered. The journey continued, taking them deeper into the wilderness, far from the comforts of civilization. The stars above seemed to grow brighter, as if drawing nearer to the earth, and the wind carried with it the faint echoes of ancient songs. Snorri could almost hear the voices of the gods speaking in a language older than time itself. At last they arrived at a hidden valley, a place untouched by time. The air was still, and the moon cast a pale light over the land, illuminating a great stone that stood in the center of the valley. The stone was tall and broad, its surface etched with runes that glowed with a faint, otherworldly light. The stranger approached the stone, placing a hand upon it. "This is the heart of the old world," he said, his voice reverent. "Here the veil between the realms is thin, and the secrets of the gods are laid bare. This stone holds the knowledge of the ages, the truths that have been hidden from men, but only those who are worthy may read its runes." Snorri hesitated, his mind racing. Could he truly be worthy of such knowledge? He had devoted his life to the preservation of the old ways, but he was still a mortal, bound by the limitations of his kind. Yet, the desire for understanding burned within him, a fire that could not be quenched. Taking a deep breath, Snorri stepped forward and placed his hand on the stone. The moment his fingers touched the cold surface, the runes flared to life, their light growing brighter until it filled his vision. And then his mind was flooded with images, with visions of the past and the future, with truths that transcended the limits of human understanding. He saw the creation of the world, the birth of Ymir and the forging of the 9 worlds. He saw the gods in their glory, their power unmatched, their wisdom beyond comprehension. He saw the great battles of the past, the wars that had shaped the course of history. But he also saw the end, the twilight of the gods, Ragnarok, where the world would be consumed by fire and reborn from the ashes. The visions were overwhelming, a torrent of knowledge that threatened to drown him. But Snorri held on, his mind grasping at the threads of understanding, trying to make sense of it all. He saw the connections between the myths, the underlying truths that had been hidden in the stories. He saw the role of the gods in the shaping of the world, their influence still felt even in the present day. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the vision ceased and Snorri found himself back in the valley, the runes now dark and silent. The stranger stood beside him, watching him with eyes that seemed to pierce his very soul. "You have seen the truth," the stranger said, his voice soft but filled with power. "Now, it is up to you to decide what to do with it. Will you write the final saga, the story that will change the fate of men, or will you let it remain hidden, a secret that dies with you?" Snorri stared at the stranger, his mind still reeling from the knowledge he had gained. He thought of the sagas he had written, the stories that had shaped the world and kept the old gods alive in the hearts of men. He thought of the political turmoil in Iceland, the shifting alliances, and the threats that loomed over his homeland. And he thought of his legacy, the words he would leave behind for future generations. For a long moment he was silent, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision. He knew that whatever choice he made, it would have far-reaching consequences, not just for himself, but for the world. If he wrote the final saga, it could change the course of history, revealing truths that had been hidden for millennia. But if he kept it to himself, those truths would remain buried, lost to the world forever. Finally, Snorri spoke, his voice steady and resolved. "I will write the final saga," he said, the words carrying the weight of his decision. "But it will not be a tale of gods and heroes. It will be a testament to the power of stories, a reminder that the past is never truly gone, and that the future is shaped by the words we leave behind." The stranger nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Then your journey is complete," he said. "You have chosen wisely, Snorri Sturluson. Your legacy will endure, and your story will be told for generations to come." With that, the stranger turned and began to walk away, his form slowly fading into the shadows until he was gone, leaving Snorri alone in the valley. The stone, now dark and silent, stood as a silent witness to the knowledge it had imparted. Snorri took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs. He knew what he had to do. The final saga would be his greatest work, a culmination of all he had learned, a story that would bridge the gap between myth and reality, between the past and the present. He returned to his home, his heart filled with both sorrow and hope. The days that followed were spent in feverish writing, the quill dancing across the parchment as he poured his soul into the final saga. He wrote of the creation and the end of the gods and their sacrifices, and of the world that would rise from the ashes of Ragnarok. But he also wove in his own story the tale of a man who had seen beyond the veil and glimpsed the truth of the world. As the final words were written, Snorri felt a peace settle over him, a sense of completion that he had never known before. The saga was complete, the story told. And as he laid down his quill, he knew that his legacy would live on, not just in the words he had written, but in the hearts of those who would read them. That night, as the winds howled outside his home, Snorri Sturluson closed his eyes for the last time. And in the silence of the night, the gods watched over him, knowing that his story would be told for generations to come. A final saga that bridged the gap between myth and reality and reminded the world of the power of words. And so, dear reader, as you lay your head to rest, remember the story of Snorri Sturluson, the man who gave life to the gods with his words, and who, in the end, became a part of the saga he had so lovingly crafted. May your dreams be filled with the echoes of the old tales, and may you find your own stories to tell in the light of a new day. And with that, we say goodbye for this time. Thank you for listening to our story, The Last Saga of Snorri Sturluson. In the shadow of the gods, where fate and honor intertwine, there are moments when even the immortal must choose between duty and compassion. Orik, a young Viking warrior, stands on the edge of death, fighting for his village against an army of giants. His valor catches the eye of Brynhild, a Valkyrie sent to carry him to Valhalla. But instead of claiming his soul, she defies the will of Odin and grants him life. Her act of rebellion sets off a chain of events that forces Brynhild to confront the weight of her choices, while Ulrich is left to reckon with a life not meant to be his. As their destinies collide, they must navigate a world where the gods' plans and mortal will come into conflict, where the threads of fate can be unwoven, but never without a cost. Welcome to Hugin and Munin Stories. This is the song of the Valkyries, a warrior's fate. Chapter 1. The shadows over Midgard. The fjord's cold winds swept down from the mountains, carrying the scent of pine and snow over Ulrich's village. That morning, as the sun barely kissed the horizon, the village of Galderborg had been bustling with the simple joy of living. Children ran barefoot through the frost, their laughter echoing as they played near the woods. Fishermen tended to their nets, while women wove by the fireside. The hearth fires were warm, and the people's hearts were content. But the tranquility did not last. By dusk, the village had been thrown into chaos. Word of giants, Jotnar, marching from the north spread like wildfire. Great hulking beasts with skin like stone, eyes filled with malevolent hunger, had been spotted crushing the outlying settlements. And now they marched toward Galderborg. Ulrich stood atop a small rise outside the village, staring into the twilight gloom where shadows crept over the land. He clenched his hand tightly around the hilt of his sword. The villagers, his family, his kin looked to him. He was not the eldest, nor the strongest, but he was a warrior. His father had been a thane, a respected chieftain, but now Ulrich bore the weight of his name. He felt the weight pressing down on him as he saw the dark shapes on the horizon, moving with the inevitability of a coming storm. "They'll be here by nightfall," said Ragnhild, an older woman, her voice calm but grave. She stood beside him, her knuckles white on her walking stick. The others are preparing, but we have few fighters. You must lead them. Hit them. Auric nodded, his jaw tight. I will fight. We all will. The village gathered, every able man and woman armed with whatever weapons they could muster. Axes, spears, even sharpened sticks. Auric gave orders as best he could, organizing the defense around the longhouse. Inside, the elderly, the children, and the sick huddled in fear. As he watched the preparations, his heart burned with resolve. He had no illusions. The giants were many, and they were strong, but the villagers would die on their feet before they gave their homes to the Jotnar. As the night deepened, the ground trembled beneath the approach of the giants. Auric stood at the front of the village, sword in hand, his breath steady, despite the fear clawing at his mind. The stars above shone coldly, distant and indifferent. He prayed silently to the gods, to Thor for strength, to Freyja for courage. But above all, he prayed for honor. He had made peace with his death. Chapter 2. A Valkyrie's Choice. In the high halls of Asgard, the Valkyries readied themselves. Across Midgard, battle and death surged in waves, and the time had come for Odin's warrior maidens to descend. From the golden spires of Valhalla, the songs of the fallen echoed, warriors chosen by the Valkyries, feasting and waiting for the final battle at Ragnarok. Brynhild stood among her sisters, her gaze piercing the realms below. She was the fiercest of Odin's chosen, her skill with a spear unmatched, her dedication unwavering. Her wings shimmered in the starlight, and her helm bore the markings of countless victories. As she watched the mortal world, she felt the call, stronger than ever, beckoning her to Midgard. The vision of Auric appeared to her as she peered into the mists that separated Asgard from the realm of men. She saw the young warrior fighting against impossible odds, his sword flashing in the dim light as the giants bore down upon him. There was something different about this one. His courage, his refusal to bend even in the face of certain death, struck her like an arrow to the heart. He is marked for Valhalla, one of the older Valkyries said, her voice like thunder. It is time. Brynhild nodded, but her mind was troubled. She could feel it, the pull of fate upon this warrior. But there was something more. As she spread her wings and soared down toward Midgard, the cold air biting at her, she could not shake the feeling that this battle was not yet over. The village of Galderborg was a battlefield. Auric fought with the fury of a man who knew his time was short. The giants were overwhelming, their massive forms crashing through the flimsy defenses like a tidal wave against the shore. One by one, his comrades fell around him, their cries lost in the thunderous roar of the Jotnar. And then, as Auric turned to face another enemy, the world went black. A blow struck him from behind, and he collapsed to the ground, the pain blinding. His body was broken, his vision dimming. The coldness of death began to creep into his limbs, and he knew it was the end. But Brynhild was there. She landed beside him, her radiant form casting light over the dying battlefield. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, softened as they fell upon Auric's broken form. This was the warrior she had come for, the one destined for Valhalla. But as she knelt beside him, she felt a stirring in her heart. For the first time in her long service to Odin, Brynhild hesitated. He should live, she whispered to herself, though no one could hear her. This is not his time. She extended her hand over Auric's chest, feeling the faint pulse of life still clinging to him. Her mind raced with the consequences, defying Odin, breaking the natural order of things. But as she looked into Auric's face, seeing the pain, the courage, and the love for his people, she knew what she must do. With a breath, Brynhild spoke the forbidden words, her hand glowing with golden light. Slowly, Auric's wounds began to heal, the torn flesh mending beneath her touch. His eyes fluttered open and he saw her, a figure from legend, her wings gleaming like a goddess. What have you done?" he whispered, his voice weak. Brynhild stood, her heart heavy. "I have given you a second chance," she said, "but the price will be mine to pay." With that, she disappeared into the night sky, leaving Auric to rise from the brink of death, his mind awash with questions, and his fate forever altered. Chapter 3. The Wrath of Odin. The night after Brynhild's defiance was darker than any before. In the highest peak of Asgard, the great hall of Valhalla trembled with the anger of the Allfather. Odin sat upon his throne, his one eye blazing with fury as the ravens, Hugin and Munin, flew to his side, whispering the deeds of the day. His spear, Gungnir, lay across his lap, but its power seemed dwarfed by the storm brewing in his mind. Brynhild stood before him, alone in the vast hall. The other Valkyries had withdrawn, their faces turned away from their sister in silent judgment. They knew what was coming. "You have defied me." Brynhild Odin's voice boomed, his words crashing like thunder. "You, my most trusted, have chosen a mortal's life over the will of the gods. Do you believe yourself above fate?" Brynhild knelt, her head bowed, but her voice was strong. "I do not, All-Father. But Auric fought with honor beyond even the gods' reckoning. I could not condemn him when his heart was still bound to this world." Odin's gaze narrowed. "Fate is not for you to decide. You have twisted the threads of destiny, and for that there must be a reckoning." Brynhild's heart pounded in her chest. She had known the cost of her actions, but she had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that Odin would understand. Now, standing before the most powerful of the gods, she felt the weight of her choice bearing down upon her. "Your punishment is exile," Odin decreed, his voice like the final toll of a bell. "You are stripped of your rank among the Valkyries. You will walk the realms alone, neither of Asgard nor Midgard, until the end of days. Your wings will carry you, but you will find no home. This is the price of defying the gods." Brynhild felt the coldness of his words settle into her bones. Her wings, once a source of pride, now felt like a burden. She rose to her feet, meeting Odin's gaze one last time before turning and walking out of the hall, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Chapter 4. The Road Home. Back in Galderborg, the villagers celebrated the retreat of the giants. Their homes had been spared, and Ulrich, against all odds, had returned from the brink of death. But for Ulrich, there was no joy in his survival. His mind was troubled by dreams of Valhalla, by visions of Brynhild and the impossible choice she had made. His body healed, but his soul felt torn. The pull of destiny weighed on him, an unseen force reminding him that his place was not here, among the living, but in the halls of the honored dead. He walked the village at night, staring up at the stars, searching for answers that eluded him. One evening, as he stood on the cliffs overlooking the sea, a voice spoke from the shadows. "Do you wonder why you were spared?" Ulrich turned, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword, but it was Brynhild who stood before him. Her wings folded close, her face shadowed with sorrow. "I know you," Ulrich said, his voice filled with awe. "You saved me." Brynhild nodded. "I did, but I should not have." Ulrich stepped toward her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Why? You gave me my life back." "I gave you a life that was not yours to live," she replied softly. "Your fate was to die, to go to Valhalla, and join the ranks of the honored dead. But I," she faltered, her voice breaking, "I could not take you from this world. I was weak." Ulrich shook his head. "No, you were strong. You gave me a second chance. But it was not my choice to make," Brynhild said, her eyes glistening. "Now I am cast out from Asgard, and you ... you are left to carry the weight of a life not meant for you." Ulrich was silent for a long moment, his thoughts swirling like the restless sea below. Finally he spoke, his voice steady. "If this life was not meant for me, then what should I do with it?" Brynhild's gaze softened. "That is for you to decide, Ulrich. But know this, fate is not easily thwarted. Destiny will find you, whether you run toward it or away from it. You must choose your path." Ulrich looked out over the ocean, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. He could feel the pull of Valhalla, the whisper of warriors calling to him from beyond the veil. But he could also feel the warmth of the earth beneath his feet, the love of his people, and the life that still coursed through his veins. "I will find my way," he said at last, turning back to Brynhild. "And if fate comes for me, I will face it with honor." Brynhild smiled, though it was a sad, weary smile. "Then perhaps there is hope for us both." As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Brynhild spread her wings and took to the sky, her figure disappearing into the heavens. Ulrich watched her go, his heart filled with both sorrow and resolve. Chapter 5. The Call of Valhalla. The years passed, and Ulrich lived the life he had been given. He fought for his people, led them with honor, and became a legend in his own right. But as the seasons turned, he felt the weight of destiny pressing ever closer. The dreams of Valhalla grew stronger, the voices of the fallen more insistent. One cold winter's night, as the stars shone bright above the frozen fjords, Ulrich stood alone on the cliffs once more. He had fought for years, but now he knew his time had come. The pull of fate was too strong to resist. He had been given a second chance, but now it was time to fulfill his destiny. In the distance, he saw a figure, a Valkyrie, her wings gleaming in the moonlight. Brynhild had returned. "It is time, Ulrich," she said softly. Her voice carried on the wind. Ulrich nodded, his heart at peace. "I am ready." As Brynhild led him toward the great hall of Valhalla, Ulrich felt the weight of his mortal life fall away. The doors of the hall opened before him, and the sound of joyous laughter and feasting greeted him. The honored dead welcomed him with open arms, and Ulrich knew that his journey was complete. But as he crossed the threshold, he glanced back at Brynhild, who stood watching him with quiet pride. She had defied the gods for him, and now she too had found her place. And so, in the halls of Valhalla, where the bravest of souls feast and wait for the final battle, the song of Ulrich and Brynhild echoed for all eternity. A song of fate and free will, of love and sacrifice, and of the courage to defy even the gods in the name of honor. Epilogue. The threads of fate. Far above, in the weaving halls of the Norns, the great loom of destiny spun on. The threads of Ulrich and Brynhild had been woven together, altered, and remade. And though their fates had been decided, their story remained a testament to the power of choice, even in a world ruled by the gods. For in the end, it is not the gods, nor even fate, that define us, but the choices we make and the hearts we carry. In ancient times, a truce between the gods of Asgard and Vanaheim led to the creation of Kvasir, a being of unmatched wisdom. Revered by gods and mortals alike, his knowledge sparked envy of two dwarves who killed him to create the mead of poetry, an elixir of inspiration and wisdom. The mead passed to the giant Suttung, hidden deep in the mountains and guarded by his daughter Gunlod. Odin, knowing its power, devised a cunning plan to steal the mead. Through trickery and a thrilling chase, Odin claimed the mead for the gods, though a few drops fell to Midgard, gifting mortals a glimpse of divine inspiration. Welcome to Hugin and Munin Stories. This is the tale of Kvasir, the mead of poetry. Chapter 1, The Birth of Kvasir. Before the rise of mankind and before the first blade of grass broke through the frost-covered earth of Midgard, there was a time of endless strife between the Aesir and the Vanir. Two great houses of gods, with power enough to shake the roots of Yggdrasil, stood locked in a bitter war. The Aesir, led by Odin, wielded the forces of war, justice and fate. The Vanir, led by Njord and his children, Freyja and Freya, were the gods of fertility, nature and magic. Each side wielded powers so great that it seemed the universe itself would be torn apart by their conflict. It was a war without end, and both sides knew that victory would come at too great a cost. Realizing that continued battle would only lead to their mutual ruin, the Aesir and Vanir gathered in the vast, open fields of Vigrid for a truce. Odin, with his long grey beard flowing in the wind and his single eye gleaming with hard-won wisdom, approached Njord. The two leaders stood beneath the towering branches of Yggdrasil, where the world's fate was forever interwoven with time. "Let us end this, not in blood but in wisdom," Odin said, his voice deep like the rumble of distant thunder. Jord, ever practical and calm, nodded. Agreed, but wisdom comes only from something greater than ourselves. Thus, the gods came together, each contributing a part of their essence. Freyja, the Vanir goddess of beauty and love, conjured a great vat, its silver sides gleaming in the light of both sun and moon. Then, one by one, the gods spat into the vat, mixing their divine essence. Odin's offering held the weight of fate and prophecy. Thor's spit crackled with the power of thunder. Freyja's essence shimmered with beauty and unspoken mysteries. The rest of the gods followed suit, pouring their collective wisdom into the vat until it brimmed with divine energy. The sky darkened, and Yggdrasil itself trembled. From the vat emerged Kvasir. He was not like the gods, not bound by the ambitions of the Aesir or the nature-driven pursuits of the Vanir. His form glowed with an ethereal light, his eyes deep pools of understanding, and when he first opened his mouth, his voice was as soothing as a mountain stream, carrying with it answers to questions unspoken. Kvasir was revered by all. His wisdom was unmatched, and he traveled freely between the realms, solving disputes, guiding the lost, and offering truths that even the most seasoned of gods had never conceived. He was the bridge between worlds, a living testament to the peace forged by the gods, and wherever he went, harmony followed. Chapter 2: The Fall of Kvasir. For many years, Kvasir wandered the realms. In Midgard, the yet-to-be-formed homes of men awaited his teachings. In Asgard, he was celebrated among the halls of Valhalla, where the warriors raised their horns to him, eager to hear his counsel. In Vanaheim, the land of the Vanir, he was honored as a bringer of peace. But even in realms touched by divine wisdom, jealousy lurked in the hearts of lesser beings. Deep in the darkened caverns of Nidavellir, the land of the dwarves, there lived two brothers. They were known as Fjalar and Galar. These dwarves, though skilled in craft, were consumed by their ambition to attain power beyond their station. When word reached their ears of Kvasir's travels, they saw in him not the wisdom he carried, but the power they could steal. Fjalar, the more cunning of the two, devised a plan. If we could drain the knowledge from his veins, he said to Galar, his eyes glinting with malice, we could brew a potion so powerful that even the gods would kneel before us. Galar, ever the follower, agreed, and the two set to work. They forged a small, secluded lair in the heart of the mountain, away from prying eyes, and there they awaited Kvasir's arrival. When Kvasir, in his endless curiosity and goodwill, came across the dwarves, they greeted him as humble hosts. They offered him mead, food, and shelter. Their lair, though dimly lit and cold, felt to Kvasir like a place of simple peace. He shared stories with them, spoke of the harmony between the gods, and offered insights into the mysteries of the cosmos. But as Kvasir spoke, the brothers grew more envious. His words, so effortlessly profound, filled them with a burning desire to possess what he held. And so, with treachery as their weapon, they struck him down when he least expected it. Fjalar's blade found its mark, swift and silent. As Kvasir's life faded, the dwarves drained his blood into three great vessels, Odrere, Bodn, and Sun, each one brimming with the power of his essence. From this blood they brewed the mead of poetry, an elixir that would grant the gift of inspiration, wisdom, and the mastery of words. But the dwarves were not content to simply keep this power hidden away. They boasted of their brew, letting whispers of its existence slip through the shadows of Nidavellir. And it wasn't long before these whispers reached the ears of one who desired power even more than the dwarves. Suttung, the giant. Chapter 3: Suttung's Vengeance. Suttung was no ordinary giant. He had seen the death of his parents at the hands of Fjalar and Galar, and his heart burned with vengeance as hot as the fires of Muspelheim. When he learned that the dwarves had taken Kvasir's blood, it became clear to him that they had stolen far more than just life. They had stolen wisdom, a treasure greater than any wealth. Descending upon Nidavellir, Suttung's fury was as palpable as the earthquake that heralded his arrival. The dwarves, though skilled in trickery, were no match for the giant's wrath. In one swift move, Suttung captured them both and demanded the mead in exchange for their lives. Terrified, and knowing they had no other choice, Fjalar and Galar surrendered the mead of poetry. Suttung, with a triumphant grin, took the 3 vessels and fled to the mountains, hiding them deep within the earth beneath his stronghold. He entrusted their safekeeping to his daughter, Gunnlod, a giantess known for both her beauty and her fierce loyalty. Gunnlod guarded the mead in a cavern so deep that even the bravest of gods would hesitate to seek it. She stayed vigilantly by its side, never letting it leave her sight. Days turned into months and months into years, but the mead remained untouched, a treasure hidden from all eyes but her own. But Suttung's victory did not go unnoticed. In Asgard, Odin the All-Father watched and waited. He knew the power of Kvasir's blood, and he knew that the mead could not remain in the hands of a giant. For the good of all realms, the mead had to be brought back to the gods. But Odin was no fool. He knew that brute strength alone could not win this battle. Thus, the All-Father devised a plan. Chapter 4. Odin's Deception and the Eagle's Flight. Odin, the wise and cunning, knew that the path to Suttung's stronghold would be treacherous, and that no ordinary disguise would get him past Gunnlod. His mind, sharp as a raven's beak, plotted a path that relied not on might but on guile. He took the form of Bolverk, a mortal wanderer, his long robes worn and travel-stained. His once golden beard was now streaked with grey, and his single eye was hidden beneath a hood. Odin, as Bolverk, wandered the realms in search of Suttung's stronghold, learning all he could about the giant's ways and the location of the mead. After many moons of searching, Odin found himself in the service of Bogi, Suttung's brother, who owned vast fields and many servants. Bogi, unaware of his brother's secret treasure, grew fond of the mysterious wanderer who spoke little and worked hard. When the time came for Odin to ask his boon, Bogi could not refuse him. "I seek but one thing, Bogi," said Odin. "I have heard that deep within the mountain your brother keeps a great treasure. Let me taste of it, and I shall ask nothing more." Bogi, though reluctant, led Odin to the mountain where Gunnlod kept watch over the mead. But when they reached the gates, it became clear that Suttung had given orders for no one to enter. With a sly smile, Odin took out his auger, a tool for drilling holes, and with Bogi's help, drilled a small opening into the mountain. Shape-shifting into a snake, Odin slithered through the crack, emerging deep within the mountain's belly, where Gunnlod sat guarding the 3 vessels of the mead. Though Gunnlod had been vigilant for many years, she had grown lonely in her solitude. When Odin, now in his true form, appeared before her, he spoke not as a thief, but as a lover. For 3 nights, Odin stayed with her, whispering sweet words and weaving enchantments of desire and trust. Gunnlod, entranced by the god's charm, eventually allowed him to drink from the mead. Odin, however, was not content with a mere taste. Over those 3 nights he drank deeply from all 3 vessels, draining them of their divine contents. With each sip, he felt the knowledge of Kvasir's blood flowing through him, filling him with wisdom and poetic inspiration far beyond even his own vast understanding. But as dawn broke on the 3rd day, Odin knew that Suttung would soon discover the theft, and he could not linger. Transforming once again, this time into a mighty eagle, Odin took flight from the mountain, the mead safely in his belly. When Suttung awoke and learned of the theft, his rage was immeasurable. With a great cry, he too transformed into an eagle and soared after Odin, the two great birds tearing through the sky in a desperate chase. The wind screamed, and lightning crackled as the two raced across the heavens, Odin with his precious cargo and Suttung closing the distance behind him. Just as Suttung's talons grazed the back of Odin's feathers, the All-Father crossed into Asgard, safe within the realm of the gods. There, with a triumphant breath, Odin spat the mead into 3 sacred vessels prepared by the gods. Yet in his haste, not all of the mead made it to its destination. A few drops spilled from Odin's beak, falling to the earth below, where they were scattered across Midgard. It is said that those drops are the source of mortal poetry, the gift of inspiration given to men. But it is only a fraction of the true power, what the gods call the Rhymesters' share. And so, the full power of the mead remains with the gods, locked away in Asgard's vaults, a testament to the cunning of Odin, the wisdom of Kvasir, and the eternal quest for knowledge that binds the fates of gods and men alike. Thus ends the tale of Kvasir, whose blood gave birth to poetry and wisdom, and whose story reminds us that even in a world of swords and storms, it is wit and wisdom that shape the fate of the cosmos. And with that, we say goodbye for this time. Thank you for listening to our story, The Tale of Kvasir, the mead of poetry. In the far north, where winter reigns eternal, the northern lights dance across the sky like rivers of fire. To the Vikings, these lights are the reflections of Valkyries' shields, guiding the fallen to Valhalla. But for Halldor, the son of a humble farmer, the lights hold a deeper mystery. One night, the lights blaze brighter than ever, and Halldor is drawn into a dream where the ancient Norns, the weavers of fate, reveal a dark secret. The northern lights are not mere reflections, but a bridge between realms, and something threatens to shatter that balance. A great darkness stirs in the frozen north, and Halldor must embark on a perilous journey to uncover the truth and protect the lights. Welcome to Hugin and Munin Stories. This is the Frozen Light, the mystery of the Northern Lights. Prologue, the Silent North. The North was vast, cold, and indifferent. It was a land that knew only winter, where the winds never ceased their mournful wail, and the mountains were like the teeth of the earth, jagged and dark against the pale sky. In this harsh realm, the northern lights were the only warmth, their radiant colors streaking across the heavens like the breath of some forgotten god. In a village nestled beneath the shadow of these mountains lived young Halldor, the dreamer. A farmer's son, he spent his days tending to his father's sheep and his nights watching the lights. Where others saw merely the work of gods, Halldor saw something more. Indeed, something that called to him, beckoning him to understand it. The elders spoke of the Valkyries and the fallen warriors, but Halldor could not shake the feeling that the lights held a deeper secret. He often stood alone on the cliffs, staring up at the sky, wondering what lay beyond the shimmering veil. And it was on one such night that the call finally came. Chapter 1. The Dream of Fate. The wind was sharp and biting as Halldor climbed the familiar cliffs that overlooked his village. He knew these paths as well as he knew the furrows in the earth where the crops were planted. But tonight, something was different. The sky was ablaze with the northern lights, brighter and more vivid than he had ever seen them. Their colors were deep greens, rich blues, and brilliant purples, and they danced like living flames, casting strange shadows on the snow. As Halldor stood there, watching in awe, he felt something stir deep within him. It was as though a voice, silent yet insistent, calling his name, pulling him toward the lights. His heart raced, and for a moment the world around him seemed to blur, the cold forgotten. That night, as he lay in his small, fire-lit hut, sleep came over him like a wave, and in his dreams the world of men faded away, replaced by something ancient and timeless. He stood in a vast hall of ice, its walls shimmering with the same colors as the northern lights. Before him were three towering figures, cloaked in robes of starlight and frost. It was the Norns, the weavers of fate, whose hands spun the threads of life and destiny. Halldor, the first Norn spoke, her voice echoing like the crackle of frozen branches. You are not a warrior, nor are you a king. But your fate is bound to the lights you so dearly love. The second Norn stepped forward, her hands working in visible strands, weaving patterns only she could see. The lights you see are not mere reflections of gods. They are a bridge connecting the realms, and they are in danger. The third Norn, the oldest and most powerful, gazed at him with eyes that seemed to pierce his soul. A great darkness stirs in the far north. You must go, Halldor. You must seek the lights and protect them. For if they fall into shadow, so too will the Nine Realms. With those words, the dream dissolved, leaving Halldor alone in his hut, the fire now only embers. His heart pounded in his chest, the weight of the Norn's words settling over him like a mantle. He knew what he had to do. Chapter 2. The journey begins. The decision was not an easy one. Halldor's father, old and bent with years of labor, looked at his son with worry in his eyes. The wilds are no place for a dreamer, his father said, leaning on his staff. Trolls and wolves roam the forests, and the mountains are home to worse things still. But Halldor could not be dissuaded. The pull of the lights was too strong, and the memory of the Norn's words haunted him. He packed his meager belongings, thick furs, a small sword, and a pouch of dried meats, and set out before the sun rose. The path northward was treacherous. The days grew shorter as the cold deepened, and soon the sun no longer rose at all, leaving the world in a twilight that never faded. Halldor found himself walking in darkness, guided only by the faint glow of the lights above him. The forests were silent but for the creaking of trees under the weight of snow. Once he heard the distant howl of wolves, but they did not come close. The trolls, however, were not so wary. It was on the fifth night, as he made camp in the shelter of a cliff, that the first troll appeared. Huge and misshapen, it lumbered out of the forest, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Halldor barely had time to draw his sword before the creature was upon him. The battle was short but fierce. The troll, slow and brutish, swung a massive club, but Halldor was quick on his feet, dodging the heavy blows. With a desperate strike, he drove his sword into the creature's chest, and it let out a howl of pain before collapsing into the snow. Breathing heavily, Halldor stood over the fallen troll, the weight of his journey suddenly feeling all too real. The lights continued to dance overhead, as though urging him onward. Chapter 3. The Seeress and the Riddles. As the days turned into weeks, Halldor pressed further into the wilderness, the landscape growing harsher with each step. The snow deepened, and the wind, once merely biting, now howled like a living thing, tearing at his cloak and biting at his skin. It was in the depths of this frozen wasteland that he found her, an old seeress, living alone in a small hut made of wood and stone. She was bent with age, her skin as pale as the snow outside, but her eyes were sharp and clear, seeing far more than the world around her. "I know why you have come," she said before Halldor could even speak. "The lights have called you, haven't they?" Halldor nodded, feeling the weight of her gaze. "The Norns told me of a great darkness. They said I must protect the lights." The seeress laughed softly, though there was no warmth in it. "The Norns see much, but they do not tell all. The lights are more than magic, young one. They are life itself, and something seeks to destroy that life." She beckoned him to sit by the fire, and as they sat she spoke of ancient legends. Indeed, of a time when the frost giants of Niflheim sought to control the lights, to harness their power and plunge the 9 realms into eternal winter. They were defeated once, she said, her voice merely a whisper. But their king, the most powerful of them all, still lives. He waits in the heart of Niflheim, biding his time, and the lights grow weak. Halldor listened, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. How can I stop him, he asked. The seeress smiled, a sad, knowing smile. The lights will guide you. But beware, Halldor, your path will not be easy. The darkness you seek to fight is ancient and patient, and it will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine. Chapter 4. The Sami Shamans. Halldor continued north, guided now not just by the lights, but by the seeress's cryptic words. He passed through frozen valleys and over icy rivers, the landscape growing stranger with each step. The northern lights no longer danced as they once had. Indeed, they had become erratic, flickering and pulsing in strange patterns, as though struggling against some unseen force. It was then that he encountered the Sami people, a nomadic tribe who had long lived in the shadow of the lights. They were a people of ancient traditions, and their shamans had guarded the secrets of the northern lights for generations. The Sami welcomed Halldor into their camp, offering him warmth and food. Their chief, a weathered old man with eyes as sharp as a hawk's, listened to Halldor's tale in silence. When he finished, the chief nodded solemnly. "We have seen the lights grow sick," the chief said. "The balance between the realms is fragile, and something dark seeks to disrupt it." The Sami shamans, dressed in furs and adorned with runes, performed rituals under the flickering lights, chanting in a language Halldor could not understand. They spoke of a forgotten race of light-bearers, beings who once wielded the power of the northern lights to protect the realms from the frost giants. "But that race is no more," the chief said, his voice filled with regret. "And now their power lies dormant. It is up to you, Halldor, to awaken it." Halldor's resolve hardened. He had come too far to turn back now. Chapter 5. The Frost Giants of Niflheim. The journey to Niflheim was unlike anything Halldor had ever experienced. The air grew colder with each step, until even his breath froze before him. The land itself seemed to resist him, the snow growing deeper, the winds more violent. At last he reached the entrance to the realm of frost and mist, a great chasm in the earth, from which rose a cold so intense that it felt like knives against his skin. Halldor descended into the abyss, knowing that the fate of the realms hung in the balance. The frost giants awaited him, their massive forms looming out of the mist like mountains come to life. Their eyes glowed with an eerie blue light, and their voices rumbled like distant thunder. "You are too late, mortal." Their king bellowed, his voice shaking the very earth. "The lights belong to me now, and with them I shall bring eternal winter to the 9 realms." Halldor stood his ground, his sword glowing faintly with the runes that the Sami shamans had carved into its blade. The battle that followed was fierce, the frost giants wielding the power of ice and storm. But Halldor, drawing on the magic of the northern lights, fought with a strength he had never known. As the giants closed in, Halldor summoned the lights, their colors swirling around him like a shield. The lights responded to his call, their power filling him with warmth and light. With a final, desperate strike, he drove his sword into the heart of the frost giant king, and the lights exploded in a brilliant flash, banishing the darkness from Niflheim. Chapter 6. The Return of the Light. The battle was won, but the cost was great. As Halldor stood among the fallen giants, the lights above him began to return to their natural state, their colors soft and serene once more. The balance between the realms had been restored, and the threat of eternal winter had passed. Halldor returned to his village, forever changed by his journey. His eyes, once filled with wonder at the sight of the northern lights, now held the weight of what he had seen and done. The people of the village welcomed him back as a hero, but Haldor knew that the lights were not yet safe. There would come another time, another dreamer, another danger. But for now the lights danced in peace, and Haldor could rest, knowing that he had done his part to protect the delicate balance of the realms. And so the northern lights continued their eternal dance, a reminder of the bridge between worlds and the power that connected them all. And as you close your eyes, dear listener, remember that the lights are still there, waiting just beyond the horizon of dreams for the next soul brave enough to follow their call. And with that, we say goodbye for this time. Thank you for listening to our story, The Frozen Light, the mystery of the Northern Lights. In the harsh lands of Viking Age Scandinavia, runes hold ancient magic that binds mortals to the gods. Bjorn, a revered rune carver, passes his sacred craft to his son, Ivar. Eager to prove himself, Ivar begins to unlock the deeper mysteries of the runes. When Ulf the Red, a ruthless chieftain, demands a powerful rune stone to secure his eternal rule, Ivar and his father are drawn into a dangerous conflict. As Ivar secretly explores forgotten runes capable of altering fate, he faces a perilous choice that will determine not only the future of his village, but the balance between men and gods. Welcome to Hugin and Munin Stories. This is the tale The Silent Stones, the secrets of the rune carvers. Chapter 1, The Apprentice. In the frozen north of early Viking Age Scandinavia, a land forged by ice and stone, nestled a small village between fjords and forests. The people of this rugged land lived simple lives, yet among them were a chosen few who held the power of the gods in their hands. They were the rune carvers, those who could take cold stone and bring it to life with the ancient symbols of magic and power. The most skilled of them all was Bjorn, a master of his craft, whose carvings were known across the north as holding wisdom beyond mortal understanding. Bjorn's son Ivar was just beginning to understand the weight of this craft. He had spent his childhood watching his father's careful hands, each stroke of the chisel filled with purpose, each rune more than a mere symbol. Runes were the language of the gods, they said, and only those who understood their true meaning could wield their power. Ivar, eager to prove himself, stood one cold morning with a chisel in hand, poised over a block of stone. His breath puffed in the air as he concentrated, his fingers tense. "Steady," came Bjorn's voice, rough but kind. He stood behind his son, his arms folded, his eyes sharp. The stone listens. You must feel it. The rune is already there, you're just giving it a voice. Ivar nodded, tightening his grip. He brought the chisel down carefully, carving a straight line. The stone gave way under his hand, and for a moment he felt the rush of excitement. He was creating something timeless, something that would outlast him, and perhaps, if the gods willed it, he would one day be like his father, a master of the runes. But as the stone yielded, Ivar felt something more than the satisfaction of a job well done. He felt a connection, a flicker of energy, as though the rune he had carved had sparked something deeper. Bjorn nodded approvingly. You're learning. But remember, it's not just the hand that shapes the rune, it's the heart. Runes are alive, Ivar. Never forget that. Ivar felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the weight of his father's words. The runes were alive. What did that truly mean? Chapter 2, The Chieftain's Demand. Days passed and the village carried on its quiet, enduring existence. Ivar continued his training under his father's watchful eye, and as he grew more skilled, he also grew more curious. He began to understand that there was more to rune carving than precision. There was a mystery, a magic that reached far beyond the physical world, and he wanted to know it all. But life, like the sea beyond the cliffs, was never still for long. One day, the peace of the village was shattered by the arrival of Ulf the Red, a chieftain known for his ferocity in battle. Ulf was a man whose legend stretched across the north, his hair like flame, his eyes cold as the sea. He arrived with a dozen warriors, their cloaks heavy with the blood of enemies long slain, their faces set in grim determination. Bjorn met the chieftain with respect, bowing his head slightly, though his expression was unreadable. Ivar stood nearby, watching with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "I have heard of your skill," Rune Master Ulf said, his voice as sharp as a blade. "I have come to commission a stone, one that will carry my name into the halls of the gods." Bjorn's gaze did not waver. "I am honored, chieftain. What is it you wish to inscribe?" Ulf's smile was thin and dangerous. "Not just words of my deeds, I want more. There are runes, ancient, powerful, runes that can shape fate itself. I want them carved into my stone." A silence fell over the gathering. Ivar felt his blood turn cold. His father had spoken of such runes before, but always with caution. These were not symbols to be used lightly. They held magic so old and so dangerous that even the gods respected them. Bjorn, too, was quiet for a moment before he spoke. "Chieftain, such runes are not to be carved without thought. They carry a power that none of us can fully understand." Ulf's eyes darkened. "I did not come here for caution. You will carve what I ask, or I will find someone else who will." Bjorn's jaw clenched, and for the first time Ivar saw something in his father's face he had never seen before. Fear. Chapter 3, The Seer's Warning. That night, Ivar found his father sitting by the hearth, staring into the flames. His face was lined with worry, his strong hands trembling ever so slightly. "Father," Ivar began hesitantly, "what did Ulf mean? What are these runes he seeks?" Bjorn sighed deeply. "They are the forgotten runes, Ivar. Runes from a time when the world was young, when the gods walked the earth. These runes do not just tell a story, they write it. They can change the course of fate." Ivar's heart raced. But if they are so dangerous, why would anyone use them? Bjorn looked at his son, his eyes filled with a sorrow that cut deeper than any chisel. Because power is a temptation few can resist. Ulf seeks to carve his name into the bones of the world itself, to bend fate to his will. But such power comes with a cost. That very night, as the wind howled outside, a figure wrapped in a cloak of shadows arrived at their door. It was the seer, a woman of the old ways, her eyes like distant stars. "I come with a warning," she said, her voice as soft as the night wind. "The runes Ulf seeks are not meant for mortal hands. They are the runes of the gods, and to carve them is to risk the wrath of forces older than time." Bjorn nodded. "I know. But if I refuse, Ulf will destroy us." The seer's gaze turned to Ivar, and her voice grew darker. "There is another way, but it is dangerous. You must find the hidden runes, the ones buried deep within the earth. Only they can undo what Ulf seeks to unleash." Chapter 4, The Forgotten Runes. From that night onward, Ivar was consumed by a single thought: the forgotten runes. While his father grew weaker, the weight of Ulf's commission taking its toll, Ivar ventured into the hills, searching for the ancient stones that dotted the landscape, their surfaces worn smooth by time but still holding the faintest traces of forgotten inscriptions. He traced his fingers over the stones, feeling the pulse of ancient magic that lay dormant beneath the surface. And as he searched, he began to uncover more than just the runes themselves. He discovered old stories, whispered in the wind, of a lost order of rune masters who had once wielded the power to change the very fabric of reality. In his late-night studies, by the light of a single flickering candle, Ivar found a scroll that spoke of these rune masters and the hidden rune that could protect against the magic of fate. It was dangerous, but Ivar was willing to risk it. His father's health was failing, and the stone for Ulf's monument was nearly complete. He knew that he had to do something, or their village would be at the mercy of a madman's ambition. Chapter 5. The Final Rune. When the day came to finish the stone, Bjorn was too weak to lift the chisel. Ivar, trembling with both fear and determination, took his father's place. He worked carefully, his mind racing with thoughts of the hidden rune, the one he had studied late into the night. As he carved, Ivar made a decision that would change everything. Among the runes of Ulf's victories and glories, he hid a single mark, the Forgotten Rune. It was a symbol of protection, one that would, he hoped, bind Ulf's power and shield the village from whatever dark fate the chieftain sought to summon. As he carved the final line, the air around him seemed to still. The runes on the stone shimmered faintly, as if alive with the magic he had awoken. When Ulf came to see the stone, he stood before it with a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. But as the sun rose, something began to change. The runes on the stone pulsed with light, their shapes twisting and shifting as if alive. A low rumble shook the ground, and Ulf's smile faded. The stone began to crack, the air around it humming with power. The Forgotten Rune had awoken something deeper, something older than even the gods themselves. Ivar's heart pounded in his chest. He realized then that the seer had been right. The runes held a power that could not be controlled, and now that power was loose. Chapter 6. The Reckoning. The earth shook as the runes flared with light, their ancient magic spiraling out of control. Ulf, once so sure of his own immortality, stumbled back, his face pale with fear. The power he had sought to wield was turning against him. The sky darkened as clouds gathered, swirling ominously above the village. The ground cracked beneath their feet, and a cold wind howled through the streets. It was as if the very world was unraveling, and all because Ivar had dared to carve the forbidden rune. In the midst of the chaos, Ivar heard a voice not of this world, deep and resonant, like the echoes of time itself. "You have called us," it said, "and now you must face the consequences." Ivar fell to his knees, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. He had wanted to protect his village, to stop Ulf from unleashing dark magic, but in his arrogance, he had set something far worse in motion. The voice spoke again, softer this time. "But not all is lost. There is still time to make things right." With trembling hands, Ivar reached out to the stone. He traced his fingers over the Forgotten Rune, feeling the pulse of magic beneath his skin. He understood now the runes were not just tools, they were alive, connected to the very fabric of the world. And they demanded respect. Closing his eyes, Ivar whispered an ancient prayer, a plea to the gods to undo what had been done. He felt the power shift, the ground steady beneath him as the runes began to fade. The magic receded, the storm overhead breaking apart. When the light finally dimmed, Ulf lay on the ground, unconscious but alive. The stone, once glowing with power, was now still. Ivar stood, breathless, his heart pounding in his chest. The village had been saved, but it had come at a cost. Ivar knew now that the power of the runes was not something to be taken lightly. It was a gift and a curse, one that could shape the world or destroy it. As the days passed, the village returned to its quiet life, the memory of that dark day fading like the last light of dusk. But Ivar never forgot. He continued his father's work, but with a newfound humility. He had learned that true mastery did not come from controlling fate, but from understanding his place within it. And so the silent stones continued to stand, their runes whispering ancient secrets to those who would listen. and Ivar, now a master in his own right, knew that some secrets were better left untold. And with that, we say goodbye for this time. Thank you for listening to our story, The Silent Stones. The Secrets of the Rune Carvers. In the rugged, ice-bound lands of Viking-age Scandinavia, where gods and legends shape the world, a young shield maiden named Sigrun stands on the edge of a prophecy. Trained in combat and carrying the divine bloodline of her ancestors, Sigrun is driven by a vision that has haunted her since childhood, a dark prophecy that ties her fate to Freyja, the goddess of war and love. As an unknown enemy begins attacking coastal villages, whispers of dark elves from the shadowy realm of Svartalfheim spread like wildfire. When her own village is threatened, Sigrun swears an oath to protect her people and uncover the truth behind the raids, even if it means venturing into realms of darkness and facing creatures not of this world. Welcome to Hugin and Munin Stories. This is the first part of the forgotten saga of Sigrun, the Shield Maiden's Oath. Chapter 1, The Vision of the Fjords. In the icy cradle of Skånsfjord, the long days of summer began to wane, and the northern winds grew colder, as if warning of a long and bitter winter. The mountains, towering and eternal, stood sentinel over the small coastal village where Sigrun, the daughter of Jarl Hrothgar, trained relentlessly by the sea. Her breath misted in the air as she swung her sword through practiced arcs, each strike deliberate, each step calculated. For Sigrun, this was not mere exercise, it was preparation for something more than the fleeting raids of her people. The sound of steel meeting steel echoed as she sparred with the village's best warriors, her hair braided tightly against the wind. Her mother's shield, once wielded by the seeress Astrid, was never far from her side. Runes of protection and power glowed faintly under the torchlight, reflecting the lineage she carried with her, a lineage whispered to be blessed by Freyja herself. Yet it was more than her bloodline that set her apart. It was a prophecy that haunted her. Since childhood, the dreams had come, visions of a great rupture that spread through the Nine Realms, dark figures seeping like poison from the depths of Svartalfheim. Her reflection stood before the chaos, marked by divine power. But it was never her alone in these dreams. Always in the shadow of her vision loomed the gods, cold and silent, watching her fate unfold. She knew she was meant for something greater, something more than the cycle of raids and glory that consumed her people. But what? That answer eluded her, even now as she fought harder, longer, and with more purpose than any warrior in Skånsfjord. The village fires burned bright that evening, the longhouse filled with laughter and the booming voices of men planning their next raid. Jarl Hrothgar, tall and grizzled, presided over the hall, his deep voice carrying above the others. Yet as her father spoke of spoils and alliances, Sigrun's gaze wandered to the flickering shadows cast by the hearth. She could feel the pull of the prophecy. Something was stirring, deep in the realms, and soon she would have to face it. After the council, Sigrun slipped away from the revelry, making her way to the edge of the village where her mother's shrine stood. The shrine was simple, an altar of stone, carved with Freyja's sigil and adorned with flowers that grew wild near the sea. Here, Sigrun felt closest to her mother, whose wisdom and sight had once been revered among their people. Kneeling before the altar, she whispered a prayer. Her voice low, carried on the wind. Freyja, great goddess of war and love, if you truly watch over me, show me the path I must walk. As the waves crashed in the distance, silence fell around her, the very air seeming to thicken. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, a warmth bloomed deep within her chest, spreading outward until the night itself seemed to pulse with life. Sigrun's breath quickened as a voice soft yet powerful, filled her mind. The realms are unbalanced, child. Dark forces stir beneath the earth. You must go where others fear to tread. The time is coming, and you will not walk alone. The presence faded as swiftly as it had come, leaving her kneeling before the shrine, the weight of the goddess's words heavy in the still night air. Her mother's prophecy, the visions that had haunted her for so long, everything pointed to the same truth. The balance of the realms was threatened, and Sigrun was at the heart of it. Rising to her feet, Sigrun made a solemn vow. Whatever danger awaited, whatever dark force sought to tear the Nine Realms asunder, she would face it head-on. The first step of her journey would be north, to the villages that had already fallen to strange raids, where whispers of unnatural creatures had begun to spread. She would not stand idle as shadows crept toward her home. Her path was set. Chapter 2, Whispers of Svartalfheim. Dawn broke cold and grey as Sigrun prepared her departure. She stood before the longhouse, her shield strapped to her arm, her sword sheathed at her side. Her father, Jarl Hrothgar, met her at the gate, his eyes shadowed with concern. "You've always been restless, Sigrun," he said, his voice deep and weary. "But this journey, it feels different. You speak of shadows and realms beyond our own. Are you sure of this?" Sigrun's gaze held steady, though a knot tightened in her chest. "It is my fate, father. The gods have made it clear. Freyja has chosen me, just as she chose Mother. There is something dark moving in the Nine Realms, and if we do nothing, it will consume us all." Hrothgar's brow furrowed. "Fate is a cruel master, daughter, but if you must go, you do so with the strength of our ancestors. Do not forget that." With a nod, Sigrun clasped her father's arm in farewell. The road ahead was long, and though her heart ached at leaving her people, she knew it was necessary. She would return, but only when she had uncovered the truth of the raids and the shadow that threatened them. Sigrun's journey north took her through the rugged wilderness of the fjords, accompanied by a handful of her most trusted warriors. Bjorn, a stout man with a thick, bushy beard, led the way, his axe ever at the ready. Beside him was Ingrid, a fierce shield maiden in her own right, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon for signs of danger. Though their group was small, they were skilled, honed by the harsh life of the north. As they moved deeper into the wild, the land grew strange. The sky remained overcast, the sun hidden behind a veil of clouds. Villages once teeming with life were now abandoned, their homes shattered and burned. The air carried the scent of decay, and the silence that hung over the ruins was unnerving. It was in one such village that Sigrun first heard the whispers. They came upon it at dusk, the skeletal remains of huts outlined against the fading light. The ground was blackened, the wood charred from some long-past fire, but there were no bodies, no sign of a struggle. Only emptiness. As they searched the ruins, Ingrid approached Sigrun, her expression grim. "There's something wrong here," she said, her voice low. "I can feel it. This was no ordinary raid." Sigrun knelt by the remnants of a longhouse, her fingers brushing the scorched earth. She could feel it too, a strange energy that seemed to hum beneath the surface, dark and foreboding. And then faintly she heard it. A whisper, barely audible over the wind. "Sigrun." Her name spoken in a voice that did not belong to any of her companions. She stood, her hand instinctively moving to her sword as the whisper grew louder. "Sigrun." The sound seemed to come from the earth itself, from deep within the roots of the trees and the stone beneath her feet. It sent a chill down her spine, and though she could see no one, she felt the presence of something watching her from the shadows. "They're here," Bjorn muttered, his grip tightening on his axe. "The Dark Elves." Sigrun nodded, her pulse quickening. The Dark Elves, creatures of myth, said to dwell in the hidden realm of Svartalfheim, a place where shadows moved and light held no dominion. Few had ever encountered them, and fewer still had lived to tell the tale. But if they were behind these raids, then their intentions were far darker than simple conquest. The whispers continued, growing more insistent, and Sigrun knew that this village was only the beginning. Whatever force had unleashed the Dark Elves, it sought more than just the destruction of a few coastal settlements. It sought something far greater. We move on, Sigrun ordered, her voice steady, though the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on her. We must find where they came from, and who commands them. As the night closed in around them, the group pressed forward, deeper into the wilderness. With every step, the presence of the Dark Elves seemed to grow, their whispers trailing behind them like shadows. And though Sigrun's resolve never wavered, she could not shake the feeling that they were being watched. Not just by the Dark Elves, but by something older, something that had been waiting for her arrival. Chapter 3. Into the depths of Svartalfheim. As the days lengthened and the landscape grew more desolate, the companions pressed on. They crossed rivers that ran cold and fast, and trekked through forests where the sun barely pierced the dense canopy. Sigrun could feel the weight of Svartalfheim growing heavier with each step. The realm of the Dark Elves was no longer just a distant shadow lurking in the corner of her mind. It was drawing closer, as real as the air she breathed. The whispers had become a constant companion to the group, like a sinister melody carried on the wind. At first, only Sigrun had heard them, faint murmurs calling her name, promising her power and secrets hidden deep within the earth. But now even Bjorn and Ingrid exchanged wary glances, their hands ever close to their weapons, as if expecting the shadows themselves to strike at any moment. One night, as they made camp at the edge of a vast, dark forest, Ingrid approached Sigrun, her voice quiet but urgent. We've seen no sign of living elves, yet their presence is everywhere. How can we fight something that hides in the shadows? Sigrun looked up at her companion, the firelight casting flickering shadows across her face. She had no clear answer, but she knew in her heart that their path would soon take them beyond the reach of the mortal world. We must press on. The truth lies ahead, and we cannot turn back now. The elves are not merely hiding. They are waiting for something or for someone. Sigrun's words felt as much a warning as they did an assurance. As they prepared to leave the next morning, the forest around them seemed to darken. The trees themselves appeared twisted, their branches like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. The ground beneath their feet grew soft, as though something below the surface was shifting. It was on the third night after leaving the village ruins that the full weight of Svartalfheim revealed itself. The group had stopped to rest in a small clearing when the ground began to tremble. The earth shifted beneath their feet, sending a ripple through the trees. Shadows danced and flickered unnaturally, and from the darkness, shapes began to emerge. Small at first, then growing in number and size. Sigrun was the first to draw her sword, the blade singing as it left its sheath. Bjorn and Ingrid followed suit, their weapons gleaming faintly in the dim light. From the shadows came the unmistakable sound of movement, slow, deliberate, and far too close for comfort. Steady, Sigrun whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. Then they appeared. Tall, lithe figures cloaked in darkness, their eyes gleaming with malice. The Dark Elves at last had come. Their faces were gaunt, their features sharp and unnatural, as though they had been carved from stone. Their skin shimmered with a strange, otherworldly light, and they moved with a fluidity that spoke of centuries of hiding in the shadows. Sigrun tightened her grip on her sword. She could feel Freyja's presence at her side. Indeed, a comforting warmth amidst the cold fear gnawing at the edges of her mind. The prophecy was unfolding, and these creatures, these Dark Elves, were only the beginning. The leader of the Dark Elves stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Sigrun. His voice was like the rustle of dead leaves, dry and hollow. "You are not welcome here, Shield Maiden. Turn back, or face the wrath of Svartalfheim." Sigrun met his gaze, her chin lifting defiantly. "I seek the truth of your raids. Why do you attack the villages? What is your purpose?" The elf's lips curled into a sneer. "You seek answers, yet you know nothing of the balance of the realms. You, daughter of mortals, cannot comprehend what is at stake." "And what is at stake?" Sigrun demanded, stepping forward, her shield at the ready, and continued. "The lives of innocents and the safety of the Nine Realms." The dark elf's eyes glinted with amusement. "Innocence? There are no innocents in this war, Shield Maiden. The gods have abandoned the realms. The balance is a lie, maintained by those who fear change. But we, the children of the shadows, will bring a new era, an era where the gods' power fades and the darkness reigns supreme." A chill ran down Sigrun's spine as the elf spoke. She could feel the truth behind his words, the ancient bitterness that simmered in the hearts of the dark elves. But she would not be swayed. Freyja's warning echoed in her mind, and the vision she had seen since childhood flashed before her eyes, the chasm, the shadows, and her own reflection standing on the precipice of destruction. "If you will not stand aside," Sigrun said, her voice steady, "then I will face you, and whatever force you serve." The elf leader's expression darkened. "So be it." With a sharp command in their guttural tongue, the dark elves surged forward, their blades gleaming in the dim light. Sigrun raised her shield just in time to deflect the first strike, the force of the blow rattling her arm. Beside her, Bjorn's axe met the edge of a dark elf's blade with a deafening crash, while Ingrid fought with a deadly grace, her spear weaving through the chaos. Sigrun's world narrowed to the clash of steel and the thudding of her heart. The dark elves were fast, too fast. They moved like shadows, their strikes quick and deadly, but Sigrun was no ordinary warrior. Freyja's power flowed through her, guiding her hand, strengthening her resolve. Every blow she dealt was precise, her movements a deadly dance learned over years of training and sharpened by her divine connection. But even as she fought, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. "Sigrun, Sigrun, you cannot escape your fate." She fought harder, pushing the voice to the back of her mind, but the dark elves were relentless. For every one that fell, another took its place, their numbers seemingly endless. And then in the midst of the battle, Sigrun saw him, the dark elf lord, tall and cloaked in shimmering black, standing at the edge of the clearing, watching her with cold, unblinking eyes. Their gazes met, and in that moment, Sigrun felt the full weight of the prophecy settle upon her. This was the force behind the raids, the leader of the Dark Elves who sought to upset the balance of the Nine Realms. And it was him she would have to face if she had any hope of saving her people and herself. But as she prepared to charge toward him, something strange happened. The air around her thickened, the shadows deepened, and time itself seemed to slow. The battlefield fell away, and Sigrun found herself standing in a vast, empty expanse, the Dark Elf Lord before her, his form larger, more imposing. "You are not yet ready," he said, his voice echoing through the void. "But you will be, and when you are, I will be waiting." Before she could respond, a vision shattered, and she was back in the clearing, surrounded by her companions and the remnants of the battle. The Dark Elves had retreated, their leader gone. Breathless and shaken, Sigrun lowered her sword. The Dark Elf Lord's words echoed in her mind, filling her with a sense of dread and inevitability. She understood that the battle for the Nine Realms had only just begun. Chapter 4. Allies and Betrayal. With the Dark Elves vanquished, Sigrun and her companions pressed deeper into the dark heart of Svartalfheim, their path now clear yet fraught with peril. The whispers no longer taunted them, but the oppressive weight of the Shadow Realm bore down with every step. They had little time to recover before they reached the edge of a hidden vale, where a river of black water ran through jagged rocks and beneath towering cliffs. It was here they encountered a band of outcast warriors, their faces etched with the lines of hardship and defeat, and their leader, a man who called himself Arn, once a great warrior but now disgraced. "Why do you venture into this forsaken land?" Arn asked, his voice hoarse with suspicion. Sigrun met his gaze, her determination unwavering. "We seek the truth of the Dark Elves' raids. They threaten the balance of the realms, and we intend to stop them." Arn's laugh was bitter and hollow. "The balance? There is no balance, Shield Maiden. Not anymore. The gods have forsaken us, and the Dark Elves are not the only ones who wish to see the old order fall." As Arn spoke, another figure stepped forward from the shadows. His name was Skard, a sorcerer cloaked in mystery, and his eyes gleaming with a knowledge far older than his mortal years suggested. It was Skard who spoke next, his voice low and measured. "You seek the Dark Elf Lord, but there is much you do not yet understand. The power he wields, it is beyond mortal comprehension. You will need more than courage and steel to defeat him." Sigrun's heart pounded as Skard's words sank in. She knew the Dark Elf Lord was powerful, but something about the sorcerer's warning chilled her to the core. Was her strength, Freyja's strength, truly not enough? "You know the path to him, then?" Sigrun asked. Skard smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. "I know the path, yes, but it is a path that few survive. The deeper you go into Svartalfheim, the more the shadows will consume you, and once you face him, there will be no turning back." Sigrun felt the weight of his words, but she did not falter. The prophecy was clear. This was her destiny, and she would see it through, no matter the cost. With Arn and Skard as reluctant allies, she prepared for the final leg of her journey. Yet even as they descended further into the Shadow Realm, Sigrun could not shake the growing sense of unease. Skard's knowledge was invaluable, but his motives remained unclear, and Arn, though fierce and skilled, seemed to carry a burden of secrets that weighed heavily upon him. And so, with the Dark Elf Lord waiting in the depths, Sigrun walked the fine line between trust and betrayal, knowing that in the end only the gods, or perhaps her own choices, could guide her fate. As the shadows grew deeper, so too did the question that gnawed at her soul. Would she, as the prophecy foretold, save the Nine Realms? Or would she become the very thing she sought to destroy? And with that, we say goodbye for this time. Thank you for listening to part 1 of our story, The Forgotten Saga of Sigrun, the Shield Maiden's Oath. Sigrun, a brave shield maiden of Viking lineage, embarks on a perilous journey to uncover the truth behind the Dark Elf raids threatening her village and the Nine Realms. Guided by visions and a prophecy tied to the goddess Freyja, Sigrun faces enemies both mortal and supernatural, crossing into the shadowy realm of Svartalfheim. Along the way, she discovers that she is more than a warrior. Indeed, she is the key to restoring balance between the realms. But her greatest test comes when she confronts the Dark Elf Lord, who tempts her with immense power. Now, in part 2, Sigrun must face the consequences of her choices as she finds herself at the heart of a much larger battle, where she must grapple with the growing darkness within her and the looming threat of the Void. As the balance between the realms crumbles, Sigrun must decide if she will fulfill the prophecy or forge a new destiny. Welcome to Hugin and Munin Stories. This is the final part of the forgotten saga of Sigrun, the Shield Maiden's Oath. Chapter 5, The Shadow of Fate. The darkness deepened as Sigrun and her companions continued their journey through the twisted landscape of Svartalfheim. The air was heavy with an otherworldly gloom, and even the stars, once bright beacons above, were hidden behind a veil of shadow. The path before them wound ever downwards, into the heart of the Dark Elves' domain, where the whispers were now a constant presence, tugging at Sigrun's thoughts, teasing her with half-truths and promises of untold power. Arn walked silently at her side, his face a mask of grim determination, while Skard, the sorcerer, strode ahead with unsettling confidence. Sigrun could feel the tension between them, a thread pulled taut, ready to snap. She trusted neither fully but knew that they were necessary. Each step felt like a march deeper into destiny's grasp, and yet the weight of Freyja's presence lingered, an invisible tether pulling her toward the prophecy's end. The river of black water they had followed for days finally led to a great cavern mouth, jagged and ominous. A cold wind swept from its depths, carrying the faint scent of earth and death. The entrance to the elves' citadel. Indeed, the elves' last refuge and stronghold. But more than that, it was a gateway to the final confrontation, the place where Sigrun's fate would be decided. Arn stopped, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "There's no going back once we enter," he muttered, his voice low and rough. "I've been here before. The things inside, they will test you." Sigrun nodded, her heart steady despite the warning. "I was born for this moment, Arn. I will face whatever comes." As they stepped into the cavern, a strange energy pulsed through the air. The walls seemed to close in around them, as though the very rock was alive, watching their every move. Shadows shifted unnaturally, growing and receding, and the whispers grew louder, twisting into unintelligible voices that echoed in her mind. Sigrun clenched her jaw and pressed forward, her mother's shield heavy on her arm, her connection to Freyja stronger than ever. Suddenly Skard stopped, raising a hand. His eyes gleamed in the half-light, and a smile curved his lips. "We are close now," he said, his voice soft. "The Dark Elf Lord awaits us. But be warned, Shield Maiden. The power you face is not one of this world. It is ancient, born of the void itself." Sigrun met his gaze. "I don't fear him." Skard's smile faded, and for a moment, a flicker of something, doubt perhaps, crossed his face. "No," he murmured, "perhaps you don't. But you should." They descended deeper into the cavern until they reached a vast, open chamber. The ceiling was lost in shadow, and in the center of the room stood an ancient throne carved from black stone, pulsating with an eerie, otherworldly light. Upon the throne sat the Dark Elf Lord, his figure tall and regal, cloaked in the same shimmering black that Sigrun had seen in her visions. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Sigrun as she entered. For a long moment there was silence. "You have come," the Dark Elf Lord said, his voice smooth and dark like velvet over steel. "Just as the prophecy foretold," he continued. "Sigrun, daughter of mortals, champion of Freyja, you stand at the crossroads of fate." Sigrun took a step forward, her sword drawn, her shield raised. "I am here to stop you." The Dark Elf Lord's laughter echoed through the chamber, low and mocking. "Stop me? Ha! No, Shield Maiden, you are here to fulfill your destiny. You are here to bring about the end." Chapter 6, The Prophecy's Price. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavier than the stone walls that surrounded them. Sigrun's heart pounded in her chest, but she did not falter. She could feel Freyja's presence coursing through her, a bright light amidst the growing shadows. The Dark Elf Lord rose from his throne, his movements slow, deliberate. He was tall, impossibly tall, his body seemingly woven from the very darkness that surrounded them. "I offer you a choice, Sigrun," the Elf Lord said, his voice smooth as silk. "Join me. Together, we can reshape the realms. The gods' time is over. Their power wanes, while ours rises. With your strength, we could usher in a new age. An age where mortals no longer kneel to gods, but rule alongside us. Sigrun's grip tightened on her sword. The temptation was palpable, the power he offered her intoxicating. She could feel it in the air, swirling around her, whispering promises of glory and dominion. But deep inside, Freyja's voice whispered too, reminding her of the balance she was sworn to protect. "You misunderstand me," Sigrun said, her voice steady though her pulse raced. "I am not here to rule. I am here to restore what you have broken." The Dark Elf Lord's eyes narrowed, the shadows around him darkening. "You are a fool, then. You would choose servitude to the gods over true freedom. They have chained you, Sigrun, bound you to a fate that is not your own." Sigrun stepped forward, her sword raised. "The gods may have laid the path before me, but it is I who will choose how I walk it." With a roar, the Dark Elf Lord surged forward, his cloak of shadows swirling around him like a storm. His blade, dark and ancient, met Sigrun's sword with a deafening crash, and the battle began. The chamber erupted in chaos. Shadows lashed out like living things, striking at Sigrun from all sides. But she moved with a grace and strength that was not her own, Freyja's power flowing through her like a river. Her sword met the Dark Elf Lords again and again, each strike ringing through the air like thunder. Yet with each clash, Sigrun could feel the darkness pulling at her, tempting her to give in, to embrace the power that lay just beyond her reach. "Do you feel it, Sigrun?" The Elf Lord said, his eyes gleaming with malice. "The power of the void. It is yours for the taking." For a moment, Sigrun hesitated. The void called to her, its dark tendrils wrapping around her mind, promising her the strength to end the war, to reshape the realms as she saw fit. She could feel its pull, stronger than anything she had ever known. But then, in the deepest part of her heart, she heard another voice, her mother's voice, soft and steady. "You are more than this world, my daughter. Freyja watches you. Do not fear your fate." With a cry, Sigrun pushed the darkness away, her sword blazing with the light of Freyja's blessing. She struck out with renewed strength, her blade cutting through the Elf Lord's defenses. The shadows recoiled, and for the first time she saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. "You will not win," Sigrun shouted, her voice ringing with the power of the goddess. "I will not let you destroy the realms." With a final, desperate swing, Sigrun drove her sword through the Dark Elf Lord's chest. The blade pierced his heart, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. The Elf Lord's eyes widened, and he let out a sound that was half roar, half scream. The shadows around him exploded in a flurry of darkness, swirling madly before dissipating into nothing. The Elf Lord fell to his knees, his hands grasping at the blade in his chest. He looked up at Sigrun, his face twisted in pain, and whispered, "You have no idea what you've done." And then he was gone, his body collapsing into ash and shadow, leaving only silence in his wake. Chapter 7: The Cost of Victory. The chamber was still. The Dark Elf Lord was gone, and with him the oppressive weight of Svartalfheim seemed to lift. But Sigrun did not feel victorious. She stood amidst the ashes of her enemy, her sword still glowing faintly with Freyja's power, and felt only emptiness. Skard stepped forward, his face unreadable. "It is done," he said quietly. "The Dark Elf Lord is defeated. The balance is restored." But Sigrun shook her head. "No, something is wrong. This isn't the end." Skard's eyes gleamed in the darkness, and for the first time Sigrun saw the truth in them. He had known all along. The Dark Elf Lord was but a pawn, Sigrun. Skard said, his voice cold. The true power, The true threat was never him. Sigrun's blood ran cold. What are you saying? Skard smiled, a slow, cruel smile. You think you have saved the realms, Shield Maiden, but all you have done is open the door for something far greater. The void cannot be destroyed, it can only be contained, and now, thanks to you, its prison has been shattered. Sigrun staggered back, her mind reeling. The void, the whispers, it had all been leading to this moment. She had not restored the balance, she had broken it. You lied to me, she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. You used me. Skard's smile widened. I did what had to be done. The void is eternal, Sigrun, and now it is free. Sigrun's heart pounded in her chest as the weight of Skard's betrayal settled upon her. She had fought so hard, sacrificed so much, and now, at the end of it all, she had unleashed the very thing she had sought to prevent. The ground beneath her feet began to tremble, and from the shadows a low, ominous hum began to rise, a sound that seemed to come from the very heart of the earth itself. The void had been unleashed. Sigrun raised her sword, her resolve hardening. This isn't over, she said, her voice steady. I will stop you, Skard. I will stop the void. Skard's laughter echoed through the chamber, cold and mocking. You cannot stop what has already begun, Shield Maiden. The void will consume everything. But Sigrun did not waver. She had faced the darkness before, and she would face it again. With Freyja's blessing, she would fight until her last breath. The final battle was upon her. And this time, she would not fail. Epilogue. Echoes of the void. It had been days since Skarda's betrayal, and the moment the void had begun to stir. The very earth beneath Sigrun's feet trembled with the dark, ancient force that now seeped into the realms. She had returned to her village in the north, her body weary, her heart heavy with the burden of failure. But even here, in Skornsfjord, far from the shattered caverns of Svartalfheim, she could feel the distant rumble of the void. The village was quiet now. The fires in the longhouse were low, the warriors and shield maidens who had once filled the hall with their laughter and boasting now spoke in hushed tones. They too felt it, the shifting of the world, the uncertainty of what was to come. Sigrun had saved the Nine Realms from the Dark Elf Lord, but in doing so, she had released something far worse. Standing on the cliffs above the fjord, Sigrun watched the waves crash against the rocks below. The sky was dark, not with storm clouds, but with something deeper, an unnatural gloom that stretched across the horizon. The void was growing, spreading like a sickness, its tendrils reaching into every corner of the realms. And Sigrun, the shield maiden who had once dreamed of destiny, was now bound to it in ways she could never have imagined. She thought of her mother, Asfrid, and the prophecy that had haunted her since childhood. You are more than this world, my daughter. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, a reminder that her journey was far from over. Freyja had been silent since the battle, her presence distant, as though even the goddess of war and love could not face the enormity of what had been unleashed. Sigrun had expected guidance, a sign, something to tell her what to do next, but there was nothing. Only silence and the cold wind that whipped through the fjord. In the days that followed her return, Sigrun felt a growing restlessness. The void was not content to stay hidden in Svartalfheim. It was reaching out, searching for something, or someone. And Sigrun could feel it calling to her, a dark thread that tugged at the edges of her soul. She knew that she could not ignore it. Whatever Skard had unleashed, it was not finished with her. The void had marked her, and it would not rest until it had consumed everything. The villagers looked to her now, not with the admiration and pride they had once shown, but with fear. She had become something more than mortal, something they could not understand. Even her father, Jarl Hrothgar, had grown distant, his eyes clouded with doubt. The tales of her victory over the Dark Elves had spread far and wide, but so too had the whispers, whispers of the void, of the darkness that now hung over the realms. One evening as the sun set in a blood-red sky, Sigrun sat by her mother's shrine, the carved stone altar worn smooth by time and weather. She traced her fingers over the runes etched into the stone, her mind heavy with questions. She had been a shield maiden, a warrior sworn to protect her people and uphold the balance of the realms. But now, with the balance shattered and the void growing ever closer, what was she? As she knelt before the shrine, a figure appeared behind her, cloaked in shadow. At first, she thought it was one of the villagers, but as the figure drew closer, she realized it was something else, something older, more powerful. "I thought I would find you here," the figure said, its voice deep and resonant. Sigrun turned to face the stranger, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of her sword. But the figure made no move to attack. Instead, it stepped into the light, revealing itself to be an old man, his face lined with age, his eyes dark and knowing. "Who are you?" Sigrun asked, rising to her feet. The man smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "I am someone who has walked the paths you now walk. I have seen the rise and fall of gods, the breaking of realms, and I have seen the void. You have felt it too, have you not?" Sigrun's heart raced. "What do you want?" The man's gaze was piercing, his eyes seeming to see straight through her. "What I want is of no consequence. What matters is what you will do. The void is free now, and it will not be stopped by swords or shields. It is older than the gods themselves, and it will consume all that stands in its way." Sigrun clenched her fists, anger flaring in her chest. "I will not let that happen. I will stop it." The man's smile widened, though it was a grim smile full of sorrow and inevitability. "You may try, Shield Maiden, but the void is not something that can be fought. It is the end of all things, the inevitable return to nothingness. You are not the first to stand against it, and you will not be the last." Sigrun's pulse quickened, but she stood her ground. "Then what is the answer? How do I stop it?" The man's eyes softened, and for a moment he looked almost sad. "That is the question, isn't it? The void is coming, and you must decide, will you fight against it, or will you find a way to survive it?" Before Sigrun could respond, the man turned and began to walk away, his form dissolving into the shadows. "Remember, Sigrun," he called over his shoulder, "the void is eternal, but you still have a choice." As the figure disappeared into the darkness, Sigrun stood alone by the shrine, her mind racing with the weight of the man's words. The void was coming, unstoppable, unyielding. But the old man had spoken of choice. What did that mean? Was there truly a way to survive the end of all things? She did not know. But she would find out. She had to. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and darkness. But Sigrun was a shield maiden, bound to the oath she had sworn, to protect her people, to uphold the balance, and to fight, even in the face of the void itself. With one last look at her mother's shrine, Sigrun turned and walked away, the weight of her destiny pressing heavily upon her shoulders. She did not know where the path would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. Her journey was far from over. And with that, we say goodbye for this time. Thank you for listening to the final part of our story, the forgotten saga of Sigrun, the Shield Maiden's Oath. In the quiet village of Midgard, young blacksmith Jari dreams of crafting legendary weapons. When a mysterious branch, harder than iron and glowing with otherworldly power, falls into his hands after a fierce storm, Jari seizes the chance to create something extraordinary. Little does he know the branch comes from Yggdrasil, the World Tree, and holds a power that could alter the fate of the Nine Realms. as Jari forges the branch into the Iron Fang. A weapon capable of cutting through even fate itself, he unwittingly draws the attention of gods and giants alike. Now, pursued by the powerful Jotnar, Jari must flee and seek the truth behind the weapon he has created before the balance of the realms is destroyed. Welcome to Hugin and Munin Stories. This is the first part of the Iron Tree, Yggdrasil's hidden branch. Chapter 1: The Storm's Omen. Beneath the pallid light of the waning moon, Jari stood at the edge of the forge, his thoughts swirling like the embers that floated in the air. His village, nestled on the borders of Midgard, was a humble one, not often visited by warriors or kings. It was a place where the common folk toiled in quiet contentment. Yet Jari's heart had never been still. From the moment he first grasped a hammer in his calloused hands, he yearned for something more. The stories of gods and heroes, tales of Thor and his mighty hammer, of Sigurd slaying dragons, stirred within him a desire to be remembered, to craft something so great that it would echo across the 9 realms. But the days passed in monotony, the same iron and steel bent under his skillful hand, never quite capturing the greatness that lingered just beyond his reach. As the night stretched onward, the air grew thick and heavy, a sensation that pricked at the edges of his mind. A storm, they said. But this storm was unlike any he had ever felt. The winds began to howl, fierce and wild, stirring the ancient trees that bordered the village. The skies darkened, blotting out the moon entirely, and Jari felt an odd pull, a tug deep within his chest that urged him to stay awake. And then it came. The first crack of thunder, not a distant rumble, but an explosion that seemed to tear the heavens asunder. Lightning streaked through the clouds, illuminating the forest beyond the village with a strange, eerie glow. It was as if the sky had split open, and something ancient and forgotten had stirred. His heart raced, and before he could stop himself, Jari had left the safety of his home, drawn into the chaos of the storm. As he stumbled toward the edge of the village, the ground beneath his feet began to tremble. The very earth seemed to quiver, as if something immense was moving deep below the surface, and then he saw it, falling from the sky, crashing through the trees with a deafening roar. The storm's winds howled in tandem with the massive crack of wood, and through the swirling darkness, Jari glimpsed something vast and gnarled plummeting toward the ground. The storm passed as quickly as it had come, leaving behind an uncanny stillness. Jari's breath came in ragged gasps, his heart hammering in his chest. The village slept, unaware of the strange force that had descended. But he could not look away from the field before him, where something large had fallen. The branch was unlike anything he had ever seen. In the faint light of the stars, it glowed with a pale luminescence, silver veins running through its bark like rivers of liquid moonlight. As he stepped closer, a warmth radiated from it, as though it held life deep within. His hand, trembling yet drawn by an unseen force, brushed against the wood. It felt both ancient and alive, humming with a power that vibrated through his bones. He knew, with a certainty that made his skin prickle, that this was no mere branch from any tree of Midgard. This was something far greater, something tied to the ancient magic that bound the cosmos. The tales of Yggdrasil whispered at the back of his mind, of the world tree whose roots and branches stretched across the 9 realms, connecting them in an eternal dance of life and death, of fate and choice. But what could it mean for such a branch to fall here, on this night in his village? Jari's thoughts raced. Was this a gift from the gods, or a warning? His mind burned with questions, but he knew only one thing for certain. This branch, this fragment of something far greater, was meant for him. With great effort, he hefted the branch onto his shoulder. It was heavier than any wood he had ever lifted, denser, almost as though it had been forged from iron rather than grown from the earth. But even as the weight pressed down on him, it filled him with a strange exhilaration. He felt alive in a way he had never felt before. With the branch secured, he turned back toward the forge, his heart alight with purpose. Tonight, he would craft something truly extraordinary. Chapter 2: The Iron Fang. In the dim glow of his forge, Jari set the branch upon the anvil, his mind racing with visions of what it might become. The wood was hard as iron beneath his fingers, its silver veins glowing faintly in the firelight. It was unlike anything he had ever worked with before, stronger than the finest steel, yet warm and pliant in his hands. He could feel the magic coursing through it, ancient and untamed. It whispered to him, a song of creation and destruction, of fate and power. He knew this was no ordinary branch. It was a fragment of Yggdrasil itself, the world tree, the very fabric of the universe. What had caused it to fall, he could not say. But he knew that its arrival was no accident. The gods were watching. Hours passed as Jari worked, hammering the branch with all his skill and strength. Sparks flew as metal met wood, and the forge's fire blazed higher than it ever had before. Each strike of the hammer seemed to resonate with the very pulse of the universe, as though the act of creation itself was being woven into the fabric of the world. The weapon took shape slowly, its form emerging from the wood like a creature being born. The blade gleamed with an otherworldly light, its edge impossibly sharp. It hummed with a power that Jari could feel in his bones, a power that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. When at last the weapon was complete, Jari stepped back, his breath coming in gasps. He had never created anything like this before. It was more than just a weapon, it was a force of nature, a conduit for the power of Yggdrasil itself. Its edge shimmered in the dim light, promising both creation and destruction. As he held it in his hands, he knew that his life and the fate of the Nine Realms had been irrevocably changed. He named it the Iron Fang. Chapter 3: Awakening the Giants. The day after the storm, Jari's life in the village changed in ways he could never have imagined. The villagers, who had always respected his skill as a blacksmith, now regarded him with awe and curiosity. Word spread quickly. Jari, it was said, had crafted a weapon unlike any the world had seen. The Iron Fang became the subject of rumors, not just in the village but beyond, as travelers and merchants carried tales of the blacksmith who had harnessed the power of the gods. At first, Jari basked in the attention. Warriors from distant lands came to see the blade, their eyes gleaming with desire and respect. Some offered him gold, others promises of glory and allegiance. But none could touch the weapon without trembling, as though the very air around it vibrated with a power beyond their control. Despite the praise, Jari could not shake a growing sense of unease. The Iron Fang had come to him under mysterious circumstances, and each time he held it, he felt a weight pressing down on him, a weight that seemed heavier with each passing day. The villagers' admiration turned to whispers behind his back. He began to have strange dreams, visions of Yggdrasil's roots stretching deep into realms he had never seen, and of giants towering over him, their eyes burning with fury. It wasn't long before the dreams bled into reality. One cold morning, while Jari was working at his forge, the ground began to tremble. At first, he thought it was another storm, but the tremors grew stronger, more violent, shaking the very foundations of the village. A low, distant roar echoed through the mountains, and in the distance, a shape moved on the horizon. They were coming, the giants of Jotunheim. The Jotnar had long been enemies of the gods, their lust for power rivaled only by their hatred of Asgard's dominion over the realms. But now they sought something more. The Iron Fang had awakened their ancient hunger, a hunger to unbalance the world and tip it toward chaos. Jari's heart raced as the giants drew closer. Their massive forms, draped in ice and shadow, towered over the landscape, each step shaking the earth like thunder. He had heard the stories of Thor's battles against the frost giants, of Odin's war with the ancient Jotnar kings, but now, as they marched toward his home, Jari understood that these were not just stories. The giants were real, and they had come for him. As the village erupted in panic, Jari grabbed the Iron Fang and rushed outside. He had never faced anything like this before. He was no warrior, no hero from the sagas. But with the Iron Fang in hand, he felt a surge of courage, as though the weapon itself was guiding him, feeding him strength. The giants were near now, their voices rumbling like avalanches. At their head was a massive Jotun larger than any Jari had imagined, its eyes burning like molten coals. Its voice, deep and guttural, boomed across the village. "Give us the weapon, mortal," the giant demanded, "or we will crush you and your kind beneath the ice." The villagers, frozen with fear, looked to Jari, their only hope. But as the giant's words settled in the air, something within Jari stirred, a defiance, a fire that refused to be extinguished. He stepped forward, raising the Iron Fang. "I am no servant of the Jotnar," Jari called out, his voice strong despite the fear clawing at him. "This weapon is not yours to claim." The giant's laughter shook the sky, but it was short-lived. As Jari held the Iron Fang aloft, the air around the weapon began to shimmer, its edge glowing with the power of Yggdrasil. The ground beneath Jari's feet cracked, and a gust of wind surged through the village, knocking the giant back a step. For a moment, the giant hesitated, its gaze narrowing. It recognized the power that coursed through the blade, the power of the World Tree, the very force that held the realms together. But the Jotnar would not be deterred so easily. With a roar that shook the heavens, the giant charged. Jari braced himself, his grip tightening on the Iron Fang. The weapon felt light in his hands, almost as if it was guiding his movements. As the giant's massive fist came down, Jari swung the blade with all his strength. Time seemed to slow as the Iron Fang sliced through the air, meeting the giant's icy flesh with a blinding flash of light. The giant's roar turned into a scream as the blade cut through its arm like butter, severing it completely. The beast staggered back, clutching the stump of its arm, ice and blood spilling onto the ground. The other giants, witnessing the fall of their leader, hesitated, their confidence shaken. Jari could hardly believe what he had done, but the battle was far from over. The Jotnar, though wounded, regrouped, their fury burning hotter than before. They would not stop until they had the Iron Fang, and Jari knew that the village would not survive another assault. There was only one option left. Without a word, Jari turned and fled, the Iron Fang clutched tightly in his hands. He could not allow the weapon to fall into the hands of the giants. It would spell the end of the realms. As he ran through the forest, the sounds of the giant's pursuit echoed behind him, but he did not slow. His journey had just begun. Chapter 4: Descent into Chaos. The forest around Jari grew darker and more twisted as he ran, the trees themselves seeming to bend and reach for him like skeletal hands. He had no clear destination, only a desperate need to escape the giants and protect the Iron Fang. His thoughts raced as fast as his feet, but no matter how far he ran, he knew the Jotnar would not stop hunting him. The power of the weapon was too great. Hours passed, and the weight of exhaustion began to press down on him. His breath came in ragged gasps, his legs burning from the relentless pace. Yet even as he stumbled, something kept him going, a voice, faint and distant, calling him forward. At first, Jari thought it was his imagination, but as he pressed deeper into the forest, the voice grew clearer. "Jari, It whispered, soft yet commanding. "Come to me. Your fate lies beyond the trees." Jari's pulse quickened. He had heard tales of spirits in the woods, ancient beings who dwelled in the shadows between realms. Could it be one of them? Or was this another trick of the giants? Either way, he had no choice but to follow the voice. It was his only hope of escaping the relentless pursuit. The forest thinned as he ran, and soon he found himself standing at the edge of a vast clearing. In the center, a single tree stood, gnarled and ancient, its branches twisted and blackened like iron. The air around it hummed with an unnatural energy, and Jari knew instantly where he was. This was Ironwood. He had heard the name whispered in old songs and forgotten legends, a place where the rules of nature no longer applied, where time twisted and magic ran wild. It was said that only the gods and the Norns dared to tread here, for the power of Yggdrasil was strongest in this dark place. But now Jari stood at its threshold, the iron fang in hand, and he could feel the pulse of the world tree in his veins. The voice, still distant, called him forward. "Come, Jari. Your journey is not yet over." As he stepped into the clearing, the ground beneath him shifted, the very air seeming to bend and warp. The trees whispered around him, their branches creaking like old bones. And there, standing at the base of the iron tree, were the Norns, the weavers of fate, their eyes like pools of infinite depth, watching him with a gaze that pierced through time itself. Jari fell to his knees before them, the iron fang gleaming in the dim light of Ironwood. He could feel their power washing over him, ancient and terrible. "You have brought the key," one of the Norns said, her voice a soft murmur that echoed in his mind. "The balance of the realms hangs by a thread, and you, Jari, hold the power to tip it." And with that, we say goodbye for this time. Thank you for listening to the first part of our story. The Iron Tree, Yggdrasil's hidden branch. When Jari, a young blacksmith from Midgard, discovers a mysterious branch from Yggdrasil after a storm and forges it into the powerful weapon known as the Iron Fang. Unbeknownst to him, the branch holds ancient magic that draws the attention of both gods and giants. Fleeing his village, Jari embarks on a perilous journey to understand the true power of the weapon. As Jari's quest continues, he ventures deep into Ironwood, a forbidden realm within Yggdrasil, where ancient forces test his strength and resolve. With the fate of the 9 realms at stake, Jari must face the consequences of his choices, confront dark forces, and decide whether to wield the Iron Fang, or destroy it. Welcome to Hugin and Munin Stories. This is the final part of the Iron Tree, Yggdrasil's hidden branch. Chapter 5, Into the Ironwood. The wind in Ironwood was like no other, unnatural, cold yet heavy with ancient whispers. The towering trees, their bark black as iron, cast long shadows across the forest floor, and the very air seemed to thrum with magic. Jari stood before the Norns, the Iron Fang heavy in his hands, though it was not the weight of the weapon that burdened him, it was the weight of his destiny. The 3 Norns, the weavers of fate, regarded him with eyes as deep and cold as the endless night. They were neither old nor young, their forms shifting like mist caught between the folds of time. Erd, the eldest of the sisters, stepped forward, her voice a soft murmur that carried the authority of ages. "Jari," she began, her gaze steady, "you stand on the precipice of fate. The Iron Fang is not merely a weapon forged from Yggdrasil's branch. It is a key, a bridge between realms. It can sever the threads of destiny or bind them tighter. But its true power is tied to the balance of the 9 realms." Jari knelt before them, his heart pounding in his chest. Why was this given to me? Why now? Skuld, the youngest of the Norns, smiled faintly. The balance of the realms has always been fragile, held together by the roots of Yggdrasil. The branch you found was no accident. It was torn from the tree by the forces of chaos stirring in the far reaches of the cosmos. The Jotnar feel this disturbance and they seek to unseat the gods, to bring about Ragnarok. You were chosen because you possess the skill, the will, and the heart to make a choice that even the gods may not make. The giants, Jari whispered, the memory of the battle in his village fresh in his mind. They want the Iron Fang. Verdandi, the middle sister, nodded. Yes, for they know its potential. But the giants are only one force at play. There are darker, more ancient forces stirring, forces tied to the deepest roots of Yggdrasil, where the Norns do not weave, where time itself is unwritten. Jari's mind swirled with confusion. What do you want from me? Urd's voice became more intense, her eyes narrowing. You must enter the depths of Ironwood, Jari. There you will find the heart of Yggdrasil, where the branch was torn from. You must decide whether to return the Iron Fang to its source, preserving the balance of the realms, or to wield its power yourself. Jari felt a shiver run down his spine. And if I wield it? Skuld's gaze darkened. Then the balance will be shattered. The Iron Fang is powerful, but it was never meant to be in mortal hands. The temptation will be great, but the cost will be the unraveling of all things. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the clearing. Jari felt the weight of the Norn's words pressing down on him like a crushing tide. But before he could speak again, a great roar echoed through the forest, shaking the very ground beneath his feet. The Norns looked toward the sky, their expressions unreadable. The Jotnar have found you, Verdandi whispered. Jari's heart raced. He had only just begun to understand the power he held, and now the giants were closing in once more. He turned to face the Norns, but they were already fading into the mist, their voices lingering in the air like echoes of a forgotten dream. Go, Jari, Urd's voice called. Find the heart of the tree and make your choice. Without another word, Jari rose to his feet and ran. The forest closed in around him, the iron trees casting long, twisting shadows that seemed to shift as he moved. His breath came in short, sharp gasps, his muscles burning with every step. But the Iron Fang in his hand was a constant presence, its power thrumming through his veins like a second heartbeat. The further he ventured into Ironwood, the more the forest seemed to change. The trees grew taller, their branches twisting together to form a canopy that blotted out the sky. The air grew thicker, the whispers of the forest growing louder, until it seemed as though the trees themselves were speaking to him, calling him deeper, urging him forward. Jari. The voice from his dreams whispered again, more insistent this time. Ahead, the ground sloped downward into a vast ravine, where the roots of Yggdrasil lay exposed. The air shimmered with magic, and Jari knew he was close. But as he approached the ravine, a massive figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking his path. It was a Jotun. Larger than any he had seen before, its skin as pale as frost, its eyes burning with a cold, malevolent light. In its hand, it held a great axe, its blade glinting in the dim light of the forest. You will go no further, mortal, the giant growled, its voice like the grinding of glaciers. The Iron Fang belongs to us. Give it to me and I will spare your life. Jari tightened his grip on the weapon. This blade is not yours to claim. The giant laughed, a sound that sent a chill through the air. Foolish human, do you think you can stand against me? Against the power of the Jotnar? Jari's heart pounded in his chest, but he stood firm. He had come too far to turn back now. The iron fang pulsed in his hand, its power filling him with a strength he had never known before. "I won't let you destroy the realms," Jari said, his voice steady. The giant's eyes narrowed, and with a roar, it charged. Jari raised the iron fang, its edge gleaming with an otherworldly light. As the giant's axe came down, Jari swung the blade, meeting the weapon with a clash that echoed through the forest. Sparks flew as the two weapons collided, and for a moment it seemed as though time itself had frozen. But Jari's determination was stronger than the giant's fury. With a final, mighty strike, he drove the iron fang into the giant's chest, the blade sinking deep into the creature's flesh. The giant let out a deafening roar, its body convulsing as the power of Yggdrasil coursed through it. And then, with a final shudder, the giant collapsed, its body turning to ice and shattering into 1,000 shards. Jari stood over the remains of the Jotun, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The battle had taken its toll, but he had won. The iron fang still hummed in his hand, its power both a comfort and a warning. But he could not linger. The heart of Yggdrasil was close, and the choice he had to make was closer still. Chapter 6. Secrets of the Norns. The ravine opened wide before Jari, the roots of Yggdrasil sprawling in every direction like the veins of a living, breathing entity. The air here was thick with ancient magic, so heavy that Jari could feel it pressing against his skin. He descended carefully, the iron fang pulsing at his side, a reminder of the burden he carried. The path wound deeper into the earth. Where the roots of Yggdrasil grew larger and more twisted, their bark gleaming like molten metal in the dim light. As he reached the heart of the ravine, he saw it, a massive root, as thick as a mountain, its surface glowing with a faint, ethereal light. This was the source of the branch he had forged into the iron fang, the very heart of the world tree. But Jari was not alone. Standing before the root was a figure, cloaked in shadow, its form barely visible in the dim light. The figure's voice was low and soft, but it carried a weight of authority that made Jari stop in his tracks. "You have come far, Jari," the figure said. "But the journey is not yet over." Jari tightened his grip on the iron fang. "Who are you?" The figure stepped forward, and as it did, the shadows around it shifted, revealing a face that was both familiar and strange. It was Odin, the Allfather, his one eye gleaming with an intensity that sent a shiver down Jari's spine. "I am the Keeper of Knowledge, the Guardian of the Realms," Odin said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "And I am here to offer you a choice." Jari's heart raced. He had heard the tales of Odin's wisdom, of his ability to see all things, but he had never imagined that he would stand before the god himself. "You have forged a weapon of great power," Odin continued, his gaze fixed on the iron fang. "A weapon that can alter the balance of the realms, but power is a dangerous thing, Jari. It can consume those who wield it, bend them to its will. The choice you face is not one of strength, but of wisdom." Jari swallowed hard. What is the choice? Odin stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You can return the iron fang to Yggdrasil, restoring the balance of the realms, or you can keep it, wield its power for yourself. But know this, if you choose to wield the iron fang, the fate of the 9 realms will be in your hands. You will be responsible for the consequences of that power, for good or ill." Jari felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had come so far, fought so hard, but now, at the heart of Yggdrasil, he realized that the true battle was not with the giants or the gods. It was within himself. He looked down at the iron fang, its blade still gleaming with the power of Yggdrasil. It had been his greatest creation, a symbol of his ambition, his desire to be more than just a blacksmith. But now, standing at the edge of destiny, he saw the truth. Power was not the answer. The balance of the realms, the fabric of existence, was far more important than any weapon, than any personal glory. Jari took a deep breath and raised the iron fang. "I choose to return it," he said, his voice steady. Odin nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Then you have chosen wisely, Jari. The realms will remember your sacrifice." With a final, determined swing, Jari plunged the iron fang into the heart of Yggdrasil. The blade sank deep into the root, and as it did, a wave of energy surged through the chamber, the power of the world tree pulsing through the air. The ground beneath Jari's feet trembled, and the very fabric of reality seemed to shift, as though the realms themselves were being realigned. For a moment there was silence. And then, the iron fang dissolved into light, its form fading into the root of Yggdrasil, returning to the place from which it had come. Jari stood in the stillness, his heart heavy but at peace. The weapon was gone, the balance restored. The weight of the world lifted from his shoulders, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he allowed himself to breathe. Chapter 7. The final decision. As the light of the iron fang faded into the roots of Yggdrasil, the stillness of ironwood wrapped around Jari like a shroud. The vast root that had once held the power of the world tree now stood quiet and whole, its silver veins pulsing gently with life. Jari felt a strange calm settle over him, but the moment was short-lived. From behind, a deep rumble echoed through the forest, a sound that sent a chill down his spine. The giants had not given up. Even as Jari's battle with fate concluded, the threat of Jotunheim loomed larger than ever. The giants were relentless, and without the iron fang to defend him, Jari knew the fight ahead would test every ounce of his resolve. He turned to face them, his heart pounding in his chest. Across the ravine, emerging from the shadows of the iron trees, came the leader of the giants, surpassing in size even the one Jari had fought earlier. This Jotun, with skin like frozen stone and eyes burning with the fury of centuries, was older, stronger, and far more dangerous. "You cannot hide behind the tree forever, mortal." The giant boomed, his voice shaking the earth. "The iron fang was ours by right, and you have sealed your doom by defying us." Jari stood tall, though fear clawed at him. He no longer had the iron fang, but he had made his choice. He had trusted the Norn's wisdom, returned the power to its rightful place. Yet even as doubt gnawed at him, he felt a flicker of something deeper, a quiet certainty, as though Yggdrasil itself was whispering to him. Before the giant could strike, the ground beneath them trembled violently, but this time it was not from the Jotnar's approach. The roots of Yggdrasil began to glow brighter, pulsing with energy. The wind howled through the trees, and a great rush of power surged through the forest, bending the very fabric of the air around them. The Norns had returned. From the shadows, Verdandi and Skuld appeared once more, their forms shifting between the visible and the unseen. They stood like sentinels, watching as the forces of fate converged in this final moment. The air crackled with magic, and Jari could feel the weight of their presence pressing upon him. "The balance has been restored," Erd said, her voice carrying through the chaos. "But the giants will not relent." The Jotun leader glared at the Norns, but even he seemed to hesitate before their power. "You meddling weavers think you can protect him?" The giant sneered, though his voice wavered. "We will bring Ragnarok upon the realms, and no Norn nor god will stand in our way." Verdandi stepped forward, her eyes locked on Jari. "The choice has been made, but the battle is not over. Your destiny, Jari, has brought you to this moment. The realms will not be saved by the Iron Fang, but by your courage." Skuld raised her hand, and from the roots of Yggdrasil, a blade of pure light emerged. Not a weapon, but a manifestation of the world tree's power. It shimmered in the air, its energy humming with the song of creation itself. Skuld offered it to Jari, her gaze steady and knowing. "This is not a weapon to wield, but a bond to forge," Skuld whispered. "It is Yggdrasil's gift to those who serve the balance of the realms." Jari hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward, his hand closing around the light. As he did, a surge of power coursed through him, unlike anything he had felt before. It was not the raw, untamed force of the Iron Fang, but something deeper, something connected to the very heart of the cosmos. It was not power to destroy, but power to heal, to protect, to unite the realms as they had always been meant to be. The Jotun leader bellowed in rage, raising his massive fist to strike. But Jari, now glowing with the light of Yggdrasil, did not flinch. He lifted his hand, and the energy of the tree flowed through him, forming a barrier of light between him and the giant. The Jotun's fist crashed down, but it met only the blinding power of the world tree. The giant howled in pain as the light seared through him, its purity too much for his ancient, corrupted form. He staggered back, his strength fading, the fury in his eyes replaced by fear. The other giants, seeing their leader falter, began to retreat, their massive forms shrinking into the shadows of ironwood. And then, with a final roar, the leader of the giants crumbled into dust, his body dissolving into the wind, carried away by the power of Yggdrasil. Jari stood in the stillness, his heart pounding, his hands still glowing with the light of the tree. The battle was over. The giants were defeated, and the balance of the realms had been preserved. The Norns stepped forward, their eyes soft but unreadable. "You have done well, Jari," Erd said, her voice gentle. "The choice you made will echo through the 9 realms for ages to come. But remember," Verdandi added, "the balance must always be maintained. What you have done today is only one thread in the great tapestry of fate." Skuld smiled, her gaze lingering on Jari. "Go now, Jari, and live in peace. You have earned your rest." With those final words, the Norns vanished into the mist, leaving Jari alone in the heart of Ironwood. The light in his hands faded, and the forest returned to its quiet, ancient stillness. For a long moment, Jari stood in silence, the weight of his journey settling over him. He had faced giants, wielded the power of Yggdrasil, and made choices that would shape the fate of the realms. But now, as the wind whispered through the iron trees, he felt a sense of calm, of closure. The world had been saved, not by power, but by balance. Epilogue. Echoes of fate. Months passed and the seasons changed. The village where Jari had once lived returned to its quiet, peaceful ways. The scars of the giant's attack had begun to heal, though the memory of that day lingered in the hearts of the people. Jari returned, though not as the blacksmith he had once been. His hands, once hardened by the forge, now bore the mark of his journey, both in strength and in wisdom. He no longer sought glory or recognition, for he had found something far greater in the heart of Yggdrasil. The villagers spoke of him in hushed tones, reverent of the man who had faced the giants and returned unscathed, but Jari sought no admiration. He spent his days quietly, tending to the forge, crafting simple tools for his people. He found peace in the rhythm of his work, in the knowledge that he had done his part to preserve the balance of the realms. Yet, in the quiet of the nights, when the stars shone bright above Midgard, Jari would sometimes look to the horizon, where the roots of Yggdrasil reached across the sky. He knew that the balance would not always hold. That someday another force would rise, and another choice would need to be made. But for now, the realms were safe, and that was enough. And with that, we say goodbye for this time. Thank you for listening to the final part of our story, the Iron Tree, Yggdrasil's hidden branch. In the remote coastal village, a dark shadow has descended. Villagers are vanishing without a trace, and whispers of an ancient curse spread through the settlement like wildfire. The Dreadkin, the restless dead, cursed to wander the earth, are said to have risen from their graves, seeking vengeance for a betrayal long forgotten. Asger, a young warrior, dismisses these tales as mere superstition until his best friend disappears. Forced to confront the truth, Asger learns that his own bloodline is tied to the Dreadkin curse, a legacy of treachery dating back to his ancestor, Bjorn the Grim. With the village's future hanging in the balance, Asger embarks on a perilous journey to lift the curse and right the wrongs of the past. Joined by the fierce shield maiden Yrsa, he must face the undead and make a sacrifice that could cost him everything. Welcome to Hugin and Munin Stories. This is the story The Dreadkin's Curse, Shadows of the Restless Dead. Chapter 1. The Shadow over the Village. The village of Skulvik sat upon the rugged coast like a forgotten relic, its people bound by the rhythms of the sea and the steady cycle of the seasons. But now, the village stood at the edge of a knife, teetering between peace and ruin. No longer did the fishermen rise with hope in their hearts. No longer did the laughter of children echo through the fields. Fear had settled over the village like a thick fog, and in every corner of the village, whispers grew like the biting wind. It began with the disappearances. First, it was Haldur the blacksmith, gone without a trace from his forge. Then Ragnar, the baker's daughter, who vanished from her bed in the dead of night. And then Leif, Asger's dearest friend, who had been hunting near the edge of the woods when he disappeared, his bow left discarded among the fallen leaves. The villagers spoke in hushed voices of the Dreadkin, undead warriors from centuries past who wandered the earth seeking vengeance for the betrayals of the living. Tales of their haunting had always seemed like mere legends, spoken around fires on cold winter nights. But now those old stories held a sinister truth, and the name Dreadkin was whispered with fear. Asger stood alone at the edge of the village, his eyes scanning the horizon where the sea met the sky. The wind whipped his hair across his face, but he hardly noticed. His thoughts were elsewhere, on Leif, on the disappearances, and on the strange dreams that had begun to plague him each night. Indeed, it was dreams of the dead. In those dreams, Asger stood before the ancient burial mounds that lay just beyond the village, where the warriors of old were said to be entombed. The earth split open beneath his feet, and from the depths the Dreadkin crawled forth, their eyes burning with hatred. He heard their voices, cold and hollow, calling to him. "Blood of the traitor," they whispered. "Blood must be repaid." Asger shook his head, dispelling the lingering echoes of the dream. He had never believed in such things. He was a warrior, a man of steel and strength, not one to be swayed by superstition. But Leif was gone, and with each passing night, more villagers disappeared. Something dark was stirring, and though he didn't want to admit it, Asger could feel its presence creeping closer like a predator stalking its prey. Chapter 2: A Visit to the Cider. The Cider lived on the outskirts of the village, her small hut nestled in the shadow of the great forest that stretched for miles beyond Skulvik. Few dared to visit her unless they were desperate, for her knowledge of magic and the unseen world frightened many. But Asger had no choice. The sun hung low in the sky as Asger approached her dwelling. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and herbs, and the sound of the wind through the trees was like a distant moan. As he neared the hut, he could see strange runes carved into the wooden beams, their meanings lost to time. He knocked once on the door, and it creaked open of its own accord. Inside, the air was warm and stifling, filled with the scent of burning sage and the faint hum of something old, something powerful. Ingrid, the village's cider, sat at the center of the room, her head bowed over a bowl of dark liquid. "You come seeking answers," she said without looking up, her voice a low rasp. "The dead call to you." Asger stiffened. "I seek the truth," he said, his voice firm. "My friend is missing and others have vanished. The village is afraid." Ingrid's eyes, sharp and clear despite her age, met his. "You are not ready for the truth," she said, "but it comes for you nonetheless." Without another word, she gestured for Asger to sit. He hesitated, then obeyed, kneeling before her. The room seemed to darken as she began to chant, her voice rising and falling in an ancient tongue. The air grew thick, and Asger felt a strange heaviness settle over him, as if the very weight of the earth pressed down on his shoulders. "You seek the Dreadkin," Ingrid said finally, her eyes distant as if gazing into another world. "And they seek you. They are bound to this land by an ancient curse, one that has festered for generations. Your blood calls to them." Asger frowned. "My blood? What does that mean?" Ingrid's gaze sharpened. "Your ancestor, Bjorn the Grim, was a man without honor. He betrayed his own men, leaving them to die while he returned with their gold. The Dreadkin are his men, cursed to wander the earth until their vengeance is sated." The words hit Asger like a blow. Bjorn the Grim was a name spoken with reverence in his family, a hero who had returned from a great voyage with riches beyond measure. But now, the truth of his legacy twisted in Asger's gut like a knife. "What must I do?" he asked, his voice tight. Ingrid's eyes softened. "You must face the Dreadkin and make amends for the sins of your ancestor. But it will not be easy. The Dreadkin seek more than treasure. They seek justice. And justice requires sacrifice." Chapter 3: The Haunted Forest. The following morning, Asger set out with grim determination. He did not go alone. At his side walked Yrsa, a shield maiden as fierce as she was skilled. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the forest as they journeyed deeper into the wilds. She too had lost loved ones to the Dreadkin, and though grief burned in her heart, it had been tempered into steel. The forest loomed before them, its trees twisted and gnarled, their branches like skeletal hands reaching toward the sky. The deeper they ventured, the more the air seemed to grow thick with the stench of decay. Asger's hand tightened around the hilt of his sword, though he knew steel alone would not save him from what lay ahead. For hours they walked in silence, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath their boots. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that danced eerily among the trees. But as night began to fall, the forest seemed to come alive with unnatural sounds, the rustling of leaves, the crack of twigs, the faintest echo of footsteps that were not their own. "Do you feel it?" Yrsa's voice was barely a whisper, her eyes wide and alert. Asger nodded. He could feel it, the presence of something old, something watching. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and he could hear his own heart pounding in his chest. They pressed on, their pace quickening as the forest grew darker. And then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. A low, guttural moan echoed through the trees, sending a shiver down Asger's spine. The Dreadkin. Before them, the earth began to shift, the soil parting as if something was clawing its way from the depths. And then they saw them, the Dreadkin, rising from the ground, their decayed armor clinging to their skeletal forms, their eyes burning with an otherworldly light. Chapter 4: The Dreadkin's Wrath. Asger's heart raced as he unsheathed his sword, its blade gleaming faintly in the dim light. Yrsa stood at his side, her shield raised, her grip steady. The Dreadkin, their movements slow but deliberate, advanced toward them, their mouths twisted into snarls of hatred. The first Dreadkin lunged at Asger, its bony fingers grasping for his throat. He sidestepped the attack, his sword slicing through the air and striking the creature's chest. But the Dreadkin did not fall, it merely staggered, its eyes blazing with rage as it swung its rusted axe in retaliation. Yrsa fought beside him, her shield blocking blow after blow as she drove her sword into the Dreadkin's decayed flesh. But for every Dreadkin they felled, another seemed to rise from the earth, their numbers endless. Asger's breath came in ragged gasps as he fought, his muscles burning with exhaustion. But no matter how many Dreadkin they struck down, they kept coming, relentless, unstoppable. "We can't defeat them like this," Yrsa shouted over the din of battle, her voice strained. Asger knew she was right. Ingrid had warned him brute strength alone would not be enough. The Dreadkin could not be killed by mere weapons, they were bound by something far deeper, something that could only be undone by confronting the curse itself. "We have to find the relic," Asger said, his voice hoarse. Yrsa nodded, her eyes blazing with determination. Together, they fought their way through the horde of Dreadkin, their blades cutting a path toward the heart of the burial mounds. Chapter 5: Into the Mounds. The burial mounds loomed before them, ancient and overgrown, as though time itself had forgotten their existence. The Dreadkin pressed in on all sides, their breath cold as the wind from the north, their hollow eyes burning with the fury of centuries. Asger and Yrsa stumbled through the entrance of the largest mound, a yawning cavern that seemed to swallow the light. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp earth and rot, the walls slick with moisture. Bones littered the floor, fragments of those who had once lived and fought here, now reduced to nothing more than silent witnesses to the curse that bound their remains. "There," Yrsa whispered, pointing ahead. At the center of the chamber, an ancient chest lay atop a stone dais, its surface covered in strange runes that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly light. This was the treasure Bjorn the Grim had stolen, the wealth that had cost him his honor and his men their lives. But it was more than just gold and jewels that had been taken. Asger could feel it now, deep in his bones. The artifact that lay within the chest held the key to everything. "The curse," Asger murmured. "It's bound to that relic." Yrsa stepped forward cautiously, her shield still raised, though the Dreadkin had not followed them inside the mound. They seemed unwilling, or perhaps unable, to cross the threshold. It was as if the very ground here held them at bay, preventing them from venturing further. Asger approached the chest, his heart hammering in his chest. His hand hovered over the lid, and for a moment he hesitated. The weight of his ancestors' betrayal pressed down on him, heavier than any sword he had ever wielded. If he opened this chest, if he confronted what lay within, there would be no turning back. But Leif was still out there somewhere, and the village would not survive the Dreadkin's wrath much longer. He had no choice. With a deep breath, Asger lifted the lid. Inside, the chest was filled with the spoils of Bjorn's treachery, gold coins, jewels, and relics from a distant land. But at the center, nestled among the riches, was something far more ancient, far more dangerous, a ring, carved from the bone of a long-dead king. Its surface gleamed in the dim light, and as Asger reached for it, he felt a pulse of power, cold and dark, radiating from the artifact. "This is it," Yrsa said softly, her voice tinged with awe. "This is what binds them." Asger's fingers closed around the ring, and the moment he touched it, he felt a surge of memories not his own, images of Bjorn the Grim, standing over the bodies of his slain men, their eyes wide with betrayal as he took their share of the treasure and fled. He saw the burial mounds being dug, the Dreadkin rising from the earth, cursed by their own anger and greed, and he saw his own face reflected in their hatred. "Their vengeance is not for gold," Asger said, his voice trembling. "It's for justice, and I carry the blood of the one who wronged them." He knew now what he had to do. It wasn't enough to return the stolen treasure. The Dreadkin would not be appeased by the mere act of giving back what had been taken. The curse was bound to blood, and it could only be undone by a sacrifice of equal weight. Yrsa's eyes flicked to him, and he could see the understanding in her gaze. "You're thinking about the Sider's words," she said. "About the sacrifice." Asger nodded, his throat tight. "To break the curse, I must give them something of myself, something that cannot be reclaimed." Yrsa was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she placed a hand on his arm. "I will stand by your side, whatever you choose. But know this, a sacrifice is not just a loss, it's also a gift." Chapter 6, The Final Reckoning. Asger and Yrsa emerged from the mound just as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. The Dreadkin stood in a silent circle around the entrance, their glowing eyes fixed on Asger as he stepped forward, the ring held tightly in his hand. The sky was pale with the approach of day, but the shadows clung stubbornly to the earth, as if the night itself refused to yield. Asger's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the Dreadkin. Their faces, twisted with hatred and pain, seemed to follow his every move, their silent mouths forming words he could not hear. He stopped at the center of the clearing, Yrsa at his side, and held the ring aloft. "This," Asger called out, his voice carrying through the stillness, "is the relic that binds you. It was taken from you by my ancestor, and I return it now." The Dreadkin did not move. Their eyes flickered with something beyond hatred, something deeper, more ancient. "But it is not enough," Asger continued. His voice wavered, but he forced himself to speak. "I understand now that it was not just your treasure that was stolen, it was your honor, your lives. Bjorn the Grim betrayed you, and I carry the burden of his sin." The wind stirred, cold and biting, as if in response to his words. "I offer you this ring," Asger said, holding it higher, "but I also offer you something of my own. My blood, my soul, whatever part of me you need to lift this curse. I ask for your forgiveness, and I give myself in return." The Dreadkin shifted, their forms flickering like shadows in the dim light. Asger could feel the weight of their eyes on him, their presence pressing down on him like the weight of the earth itself. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. And then, one by one, the Dreadkin began to kneel. Their bodies, once twisted and decayed, slowly crumbled into the earth, their bones sinking into the soil as if the very ground itself was swallowing them whole. Their eyes, once filled with hatred, dimmed and faded until they were nothing more than empty sockets staring into the void. Asger felt a strange heaviness leave his chest, a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying. The curse had been lifted. The Dreadkin were at rest. But as the last of the Dreadkin disappeared into the earth, Asger knew that something had changed within him. The sacrifice he had made, the part of his soul he had given, was gone, and it could never be reclaimed. He would never be the same. Yrsa stood beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "You broke the curse." Asger nodded, though his heart was heavy. "Yes," he said, "but it came at a price." They stood in silence for a moment, watching as the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, casting long shadows across the burial mounds. The village of Skaldvik would be safe now, but Asger knew that the legacy of the Dreadkin would live on in his heart. Chapter 7, Legacy of the Fallen. Days passed, and the village slowly returned to its rhythm. The fishermen once again set out before dawn, the children played in the fields, and the villagers dared to speak of hope. But for Asger, the weight of what had transpired remained. He stood at the edge of the sea, watching the waves crash against the shore, and felt the pull of the ocean deep within his bones. He had saved his village, lifted the curse, but at a cost that he alone could bear. Yrsa approached him, her armor gleaming in the light of the setting sun. She had been a steadfast companion, and though the curse had been broken, Asger knew that their journey was far from over. "The dead rest now," Yrsa said, her voice quiet. "But we are still here." Asger turned to her, his gaze steady. "We are, and we must carry the weight of what we've done." Yrsa nodded. "There is more to this world than curses and dreadkin. More to life than vengeance and honor. You have a chance to build something new, Asger, to create a legacy that is not bound by the sins of the past." Asger looked out over the sea, the horizon stretching endlessly before him. Yrsa's words rang true. The dreadkin were gone, but the future was his to shape. He could be more than the blood of Bjorn the Grim. He could be the man who gave everything to save his people. And perhaps, one day the weight of that sacrifice would feel lighter. And with that, we say goodbye for this time. Thank you for listening to our story, The Dreadkin's Curse, Shadows of the Restless Dead.